Chapter 29. The light bulb hanging on the iron wall emitted a dim light, illuminating the boiling crucible and the messy metal pieces on the table. Other than the thunder outside the door and the rainstorm falling to the ground, in the enclosed space, there was only turbid breathing like bellows. The red glove was topless. He gritted his teeth and changed the bandages on his bloody upper body. When he took off the gauze stuck to his flesh, scarlet blood seeped out from behind the torn scab. It was as if countless blades had been stuffed in. The tiny incisions opened like pink mouths and spat out scarlet saliva. "FUX gay." That monster junior high school student from Doomsday. The red glove cursed in a low voice, picked up the spray can, and pressed it against the wound. A burst of green spray fell on his body, like sulfuric acid falling into an alkaline liquid, producing a sizzling sound. In the suppressed roar of pain, the light green mist seemed to be alive, drilling into his wound bit by bit. Then, his entire upper body began to squirm, like a snake's nest. He collapsed on the ground, spasming in pain, and couldn't help but scream in pain. It was as if something was using his body as a battlefield to fight. Soon, blood clots and pieces of internal organs flowed out of his wounds. They carried a deep green color, as well as wisps of black ash. It was the poison of Chongqing that was forcefully squeezed out from his lungs. If it were someone else, they would have died long ago. If it weren't for his stigmatotaxin that could temporarily zombify his body, he probably wouldn't have been able to withstand the attack of fighting poison with poison. In just a few seconds, he was already sweating profusely. Sweat mixed with rotten blood flowed out from the wound. It was like a living corpse dragged out from a coffin by grave robbers. But no matter what, he was still alive. Even this near-death experience gave him a lot more confidence in advancing to the nightmare terrors and stepping into the fourth stage. When the alarm clock rang, he finally had the strength to get up from the ground, picked up the pliers, and poured the silver liquid in the boiling crucible into the iron cup. It sizzled. That wasn't a delicious drink. It was clearly a pool of boiling metal solution. Even if he was now half zombified, the red glove hesitated for a long time after picking up the cup. Unfortunately, this temporary silver blood potion was only effective when it was in a liquid state. He made up his mind and finished the cup in one gulp. In the intense burning pain, he almost suspected that his esophagus and oral cavity had been burned into charcoal, but this was a necessary price. This liquid, which was fatal to ordinary people, was actually a kind of miniature stigmata with no grade. It was a temporary miracle carried by liquid metal, which could repair the damaged stigmata and the body in a short time. It was like an all-purpose glue. The technology to keep it in liquid state at room temperature was the secret of every alchemy workshop, and it was impossible for it to be leaked. Now, in a hurry, he could only prepare this version that had serious consequences. Soon, his mangled upper body healed, and traces of metallic light could be seen from the wound. The solidified iron seemed to have fused with the flesh and blood, gluing the broken shell back together. The intense pain also consumed his remaining energy, causing him to become even more dizzy, and he almost fainted. His hands trembled as he fished out a package from his pocket. He opened the package and took out the incense inside, using his own origin flame to light it up. Wisps of smoke crawled into his nostrils. His pale face gradually became rosy, and his depleted energy slowly recovered under the stimulation of the incense. But it was less than 1/10 of his normal state. After all, the convenient creation of red and blue bottles in online games was not realistic. Even if there was one, the cost was so high that one could be sold for millions of dollars. After all, it was a tool that could save a life at a critical moment. Metal to repair the body, incense to maintain the soul. This was the daily life of every border ascendant. Until now, he finally pulled his hand out, put the phone that had been vibrating for a long time to his ear, and answered. "It's me. I'm still in Exine High. How's the situation?" The person on the phone asked. "I'm injured, and I'm still losing blood. Fortunately, you gave me the 4 of spades, or else I would have been caught." He struggled to put on his jacket with one hand. Xian High is now filled with the fuse of the Astronomy Society, and the backup safe house has been discovered. Don't worry, I'll leave at midnight. I prepared my own escape route, and I won't leave any traces. Be careful. Don't stay in the present world anymore. Come back as soon as possible. The person on the phone reminded him one last time. Even though the wedge in Xian High hasn't been removed, it won't affect the big picture. Your mission has been completed. Soon, we'll be able to open the path to Demonic City. If the situation is dangerous, make the decision yourself. Prioritize your own safety. The red glove hung up the phone indifferently and started to destroy all the things that he could not take with him. Soon he was done. The time was 11:15 p.m. It was time to leave this city of living zombies, bang. Suddenly, the sound of a collision came from afar. The red glove was stunned and looked at the surveillance screen in the corner. Someone is coming. He opened his palm, summoned the fish tank, and lowered his head to look into the water. Just outside the door, a red sports car crashed into a mountain of containers, and black smoke rose from it. Car accident? Cough, 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 cough. In a burst of thick smoke, Huaisher climbed out of the car in a sorry state. He felt dizzy, and the cold rain poured down, waking him up. He looked around blankly and saw the layers of containers piled up in the dock area, and a sea that was as cold as iron under the gloomy sky in the distance. We're here. Yes, we're here. The crow, who had narrowly escaped death, flew out of the car and looked around. Couldn't you have found a parking lot? Even if I said to be reckless, you didn't have to be so stubborn as to drive your car and barge in, did you? Have you forgotten the sins you've committed? Huaisher glared at him. Even if I park the car, I don't have the money to pay the fare, okay? Then why didn't you leave the car and ask Yu Dongri to pay for it himself after he was discharged from the hospital? Huaisher was stunned for a moment. She realized that in terms of being heartless, this damn bird was still a level higher. In terms of being black-hearted, I, Huaisher, am willing to respect you as the strongest. He looked around in the heavy rain, trying to distinguish the terrain, and found that he was completely confused. No matter where he was, it was the same, with all kinds of colorful containers piled up to form a crossroad. He couldn't tell where he was at all, not to mention finding the red glove hidden among them. They had agreed to go out and fight monsters. They had arrived. Monsters? Crow pondered for a moment and suggested a bad idea. Why don't you try shouting? Huaisher was stunned for a moment, and then nodded in agreement. He raised his hands to his mouth and shouted, "Hello? Are you there? Is anyone there? Fellow countrymen, open the door and send warmth. Brother Red Glove, where are you hiding?" No one responded. In the darkness, the Red Glove coldly looked at the reflection in the water, expressionless. What is it? Is it a joke? In an instant, the water in the fish tank rippled slightly. The distant perspective looked around, and after making sure that no one was lying in ambush, it seemed to put down the binoculars and then picked up something. Then, a neat and detailed cross appeared in the mirror. It slowly moved and aimed at Huaisher's hood. At the top of the crane, suspended in the air, the figure covered with a dust-proof cloth crawled on the arm of the crane, slowly got up, allowing the rainstorm to wash his pale skin. There was no light in his dull eyes, and only a goldfish slowly swam in them. The heavy sniper rifle was leveled in his hands. He held his breath. In the painful suffocation, the deep barrel of the gun pointed forward from the pair of flat hands. The pitch-black gun reflected the endless rain in the sky. At that moment, hundreds of meters away from the heavy rain and strong wind, the scope had already locked on to the unprepared blurry figure in the rain. The thumb retracted slightly. At that moment, the scene in the scope changed abruptly, and a gigantic scarlet eye emerged from it. It seemed to be staring straight at the Red Glove's face through the fish tank's reflection. The sudden impact caused the Red Glove's hand to tremble, and he almost overturned the fish tank. "What the hell? What are you doing, little bro?" The crow, who had landed on the gun and was sneakily looking through the scope, suddenly spoke. "Isn't it a bit inappropriate to stand so high up in the rain?" Here, as she spoke, she raised her claws and placed the item she was holding into the dumbfounded puppet's hand. "Here's something good for you. Under the red glove's control, the puppet subconsciously lowered its head and saw that it was holding a thin and long iron wire. In that instant, it seemed like there was a faint azure light shining from the iron wire. In the next second, he couldn't see anything amidst the roaring thunder. Bang! What the fucks? The red glove staggered back a step as if he'd been struck by lightning. He subconsciously covered his forehead, feeling the pain of the split origin substance being burned by the lightning. Moreover, the thing that caused him to feel even more uneasy was that strange crow. He couldn't help but think of the White Emperor's disciple that possessed a brilliant reputation in the Eastern Xia and the young woman that always ran around with a pigeon. He suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. How many of the same batch of monsters had those lunatics under Jixia created? If that was the case, there was no point in avoiding and hiding anymore. Only by risking his life would he have a chance of survival. His expression became gloomy, and he clenched his fists tightly. After hearing the sharp sound of steel shattering in the distance, he slowly pushed open the door and walked out of the container he was hiding in. Facing the heavy rain, right in front of the crossroads between layers of piled steel, the youth's shouts came to an abrupt end. He actually came out. Huaisher was also surprised. It was as if no one had really jumped out when he shouted that no one would save him. "You're actually the only one." The red glove tilted his head and looked around. He didn't find any traces of other people, and his expression became colder. The people of Dongsha are really getting worse with each generation. Ah, no, you might have misunderstood. Huaisher waved his hand awkwardly and sighed helplessly. "Although it's not the first time we've met, it seems like I should introduce myself. However, I don't really like that kind of formality. So if you really want to find a name for me, you can call me." As he spoke, he took off his hood, revealing his face and the pink mask covering it. Huaihai Road's little page. The red glove was stunned. What the hell was that? Ari Yukiting? What Huaihai Road's little page? It was understandable. No matter who it was inevitable that they would be stunned when they saw that mask, right? And just as he was stunned, Huaisher, who had been preparing for this moment for a long time, pulled out Yu Dongri's gun from behind his waist, pointed it at the red glove's face, and pulled the trigger. Bang! Chapter 31. The distance was 15 meters. The automatic revolver of Matiba spewed out flames and aimed at his face. When the fire lit up, the red glove's face suddenly changed, and he subconsciously dodged. But he was too late. In an instant, the bullet penetrated his body, bringing with it a burst of blood. Hit! Huaisher's eyes lit up. Then he heard a roar. It was the red glove. He was not dead yet, but there was a terrible hole in his mouth. The bullet shattered half of his face, broke half of his cheekbone, and spun around to smash and tear his right ear. The broken muscles and flesh were torn from his face, dragging half of his face hanging in the air. Serious injury. F***, just a little bit more. Huaisher gritted his teeth, feeling that he was about to die of anger. He had been preparing for this moment for so long, but he failed because of the recoil. He had already paid attention to it, but the trajectory still deviated by an insignificant half a centimeter. The result was a world of difference from a headshot. The injury that was enough to make an ordinary person faint in an instant was not painful or itchy to the half-dead red glove at this moment, but it made him so angry that he could not suppress his anger. He had been fully focused on preparing for a bloody battle, but he didn't expect that what awaited him would be such an unpresentable, comical routine. The expected strong enemy did not appear at all, but Little Page jumped out. F***, Little Page. He was actually played by a rookie to this extent. In his fury at this moment, he could not help but want to laugh, laughing at himself for being bitten by a snake. He had unknowingly developed a phobia for birds. If those guys knew, they would laugh until they could not take care of themselves. Missing the shot, Huaisher did not even waste time to be depressed. He stepped forward, stabilized the gun again, and pulled the trigger at the red glove. But this shot hit nothing but air. At that moment, as the red glove retreated, his figure suddenly blurred in the heavy rain. It was like a drop of ink falling into water, instantly spreading, thinning, and melting into the blurred rain. This was the inherent skill of the stigmata taxin after entering the third stage. In addition to the half-dead and almost immortal physique at any time, it was this strange and terrifying stealth ability. Dissolve. In the legends of Eastern Europe, the true form of the Taxim was the living dead that had crawled out of its own grave. In other words, it was the spirit of vengeance. It was precisely because of its special origin buried deep under the ground that it had this characteristic that no one could detect. This was not an invisibility that could be detected by thermal vision, eye of illusion breaker, or eye of truth. Once he activated Melt, even if he were to tap dance in front of a sublimator who specialized in detection, no one would be able to detect him. Subconsciously, people would block him out and forget him. At that moment, Huaisher was suddenly puzzled. Why am I here? If he was an ordinary person, he would have even forgotten why he was here. But the moment he reacted, he felt his vision go black. He fell forward involuntarily and fell to the ground like a dog eating shit. He felt a sharp pain in his back. He was shot in the same place again. Even with the bulletproof vest, he almost could not get up. What was more painful was that the wound on his inner side that had not yet healed was torn open. Wet blood gushed out from under the waterproof shell, making the uneasiness and fear in his heart more and more intense. He knew that just now, the red glove stood behind him and calmly looked at his confused look. Then, the red glove raised his hand and fired a shot. It was like a cat catching a mouse. He looked at his disheveled appearance, but when he turned his head, he could not see anything clearly. Where was he? He opened his eyes wide and looked around attentively. He saw the ripples of rainwater falling on the ground, the containers around him, and a man walking slowly in front of him. But he could not see where the red glove was. He was behind him just now, but he could not detect any signs in advance. Even if he was close at hand, he was afraid that he would turn a blind eye to him. This terrifying concealment ability made him tremble from the bottom of his heart. According to Crow's information, the red glove stigmata taxin was able to affect people's subjective consciousness. Its flaw was that it was not effective in videos and photos. It could be detected through the medium of reflections, but now that the rain was so heavy, his knockoff would only leak electricity. And all the mirrors were blurred by the rain. He could not see any reflections at all. Wait, videos and photos. Suddenly he had a bold idea. He suddenly summoned the Book of Destiny. The pages of the book moved without any wind, directly flipping to the latest progress, the line where he had written his bold idea. His two eyes kept glancing at the handwriting on the page while looking around vigilantly, looking for traces of the red glove. Endless rain fell from the sky. The sound of thunder and the sound of falling rain overlapped and turned into a roar. A bolt of lightning fell to the ground, and the electric light burst, illuminating Huaisher and the man on his right, who was calmly looking at his frightened expression. Right? The moment this line of words appeared, Huaisher pulled the trigger to the right without hesitation. Bang! Hit! Huaisher was ecstatic. He saw blood spurt out from a man's chest, but he could not find any trace of the red glove. Where did he hide? Gone again? Huaisher looked around vigilantly and lowered his head to look at the page. In a stinging pain of blood loss, his eyes were covered by the rain. He did not notice the figure with a gun in front of him. Bang! Huaisher pulled the trigger again. Another streak of blood spurted out from the man's arm, but Huaisher still couldn't see his shadow. She didn't even notice the angry curse. He only saw the pistol that had fallen to the ground. Huaisher breathed a sigh of relief and looked down. The man quickly retreated, dodging Huaisher's muzzle. He seemed to be in disbelief that Huaisher could detect his presence. His face was livid with rage. Then, he opened his mouth and roared. Huaisher heard the roar of a lion. The roar of a lion? Huaisher was amused again. The description of this stupid thing was really uncanny. But then, he really saw a lion, a real lion. Amidst the torrential rain, the gigantic lion leapt down from the container and landed in front of Huaisher, roaring towards the sky. There was even a South African zoo logo on its neck. In its empty eyes, a goldfish quietly swam and cast an indifferent glance at Huaisher. What is this, an illusion? Huaisher could not believe it. He subconsciously took 2 steps back and heard the voice of the crow. "Little brother, what are you doing?" "Shoot, this is a lion sent by South Africa to the Jinling Zoo for exhibition. It's the real deal. Are you going to wait to be its little fresh meat?" In the heavy rain, the huge wild lion slowly walked forward. Its wet mane was like a rope hanging from its neck, swaying with its steps. The fish tank could even control animals? Huaishur could not believe it, but he did not dare to hesitate. He aimed at the lion in front of him and crazily pulled the trigger. But after 2 shots, there was no more sound from the barrel. There were no more bullets. F***CK. Huaishur hurriedly opened the magazine and tossed out the shell. She then grabbed a handful of bullets from her pocket and hurriedly reloaded the magazine. Before he could fill a few bullets, the lion had already pounced. With a roar, the heavy rain curtain was smashed by the man-eating beast. Its amazing weight was like a cannonball. Its sharp claws swung down at Huaishur's face. In a hurry, Huaishur only had time to raise his right hand in front of his face. Then, a cracking sound was heard. His right hand was cleanly broken. Blood spurted out from the claw marks, spreading a shocking scarlet color in the puddle on the ground. The pistol fell into the puddle. The hot barrel evaporated water vapor and sizzled, and he had already been thrown to the ground. It opened its bloody mouth and bit down on his neck. "Go!" In that instant, Huaishur howled. His left hand tossed the Book of Destiny aside. The heavy book returned to its origin substance form in the air, returning to his soul. Immediately afterwards, his left hand seemed to ignite, covered in pure, white origin substance flames. Sealing hand, activate. In that instant, Huaishur's burning left hand suddenly stretched out, as if he had grabbed onto something. He gripped onto an invisible handle. A second later, the invisible axe chopped down at the lion, chopping into its skull, splitting open its flesh, and digging into its skull. However, the lion's skull was too hard. Even with the weight and sharpness of the invisible axe, it was difficult to pierce through. But it didn't matter. Huaishur's consciousness power was not used to create invisible weapons to chop people. The most important part of it was not the blade, but the thing that it was forged from. The anger and killing intent that had been accumulating for 7 years had solidified. In that instant, pitch-black origin substance fluctuations exploded from a blade. The angry flames and icy killing intent transformed into a black tide that sank into the lion's skull. In the blink of an eye, the fish tank behind the eyes was dyed pitch black. The goldfish trembled violently and actually exploded. The invisible killing intent and anger flowed through the fish tank's bridge and entered the red glove's brain, exploding in an instant. A miserable cry rang out. Sticky blood seeped out from the corners of his eyes and nostrils, and from his ears. It was as if his soul had been smashed by a hammer. The fish tank in his hand suddenly shook, and a crack appeared. Amidst the red glove's tragic cries, Huaishur took advantage of the lion's momentary paralysis and reached out to grab the pistol that had fallen to the ground. She abruptly thrust the barrel of the gun into the lion's eyes and pulled the trigger repeatedly. After 3 gunshots, the bullets that had been hastily stuffed and were all used up, sticky brain matter spurted out from the hole in the lion's head. It was dead. Huaishur tried his best to push the lion away from his body. He only felt that his broken right hand was in excruciating pain. When he got up, he finally saw the red glove leaning against the container and panting tiredly. The violent impact made him unable to maintain his melted state. Viscous blood flowed out from his mouth and nose. He no longer had the high and mighty appearance he had when they first met. He was in a sorry state, as if he was about to die. But when he looked at Huaishur, his broken face revealed a hideous smile. "You think this is the end?" At that moment, Huaishur felt something wrap around his leg. It was heavy and cold, and it extended upward silently. In the blink of an eye, it coiled around him, layer by layer, and suddenly tightened. It squeezed his broken hand, causing Huaishur to scream in pain. When he turned his head, he saw what was wrapped around his body at that moment. Cold scales, a slender body, and a long tongue that constantly flickered. It was a huge python. The snake's head, which was bigger than Huaishur's fist, stopped in front of Huaishur. It opened its mouth and spat out a gust of fishy wind. In the empty eye sockets, the goldfish was still there. There was actually a snake. Chapter 32. There was even a snake. Huaishur couldn't help but sigh helplessly under the mask. Under the red glove's control, the giant python slowly tightened, as if trying to break his bones bit by bit. It even specifically bound his left hand, not giving him any chance to move. The pistol fell to the ground. I admit, I almost lost to you almost. The red glove dragged his wounded leg and staggered forward. His ferocious face was full of gloom and ruthlessness that made people's hearts palpitate. However, your strange little tricks end here. As he said that, he slowly lifted the fish tank in his hand and showed him the last fish fry left in it. Don't be afraid, I won't kill you. After all, even I don't have many chances to turn a sublimator into bait. As he spoke, the fish tank in his hand continuously surged with origin substance. The red glove continuously split a part of his soul, turning it into bait to raise the fry. In the blink of an eye, the pink goldfish rapidly swelled. In the end, it turned a bluish-purple color. The bulging fish's eyes were bloodshot as it stared straight at Huaishur. Catalyzing the fry into a sublimator had obviously overdrawn a lot of the red glove's energy. His face was already pale, and he staggered. He could feel his dizzy consciousness and his body reaching its limit. When he thought about how a newly promoted sublimator could force him into such a situation, he couldn't help but feel sorrow from the bottom of his heart. However, now was not the time to be weak. He raised his hand and suddenly punched Huaishur in the face. Immediately after, he punched again, shattering the comical mask, revealing Huaishur's young and tender face. "It's you?" He was stunned as he recognized the youth in front of him. Then, his gaze became even more vicious. Not killing you back then was a huge mistake. Fortunately, it's not too late to redeem myself. Big brother, you talk too much. If you want to kill me, then do it quickly. As if he couldn't stand the python's entanglement, Huaishur's face was covered in snot and tears, as if the pain from his wounds was squeezing him to tears. Come on, at most 18 years, no, 17 years later, you'll be a good man again. The red glove sneered. 17 years? He didn't have 17 years left. After his soul was consumed by the goldfish, Huaishur would become an empty, living corpse. He raised his left hand and suddenly pressed it on Huaishur's forehead. The goldfish in the fish tank disappeared in an instant. Huaishur screamed. Scream, scream. Very soon, your 5 senses will be completely devoured, and you won't be able to feel any pain anymore. The red glove laughed, but when he saw the messy scene around him, he couldn't help but feel sad again. A feeling of being away from home emerged in his heart. After all, this was not his hometown. He really missed the moist forest and those little mice. Thinking of this, he could not help but cry. But immediately, he was horrified as he realized where the sadness came from. That python was spasming, as if it was crying bitterly. It couldn't even wrap itself around its prey. But he had no time to care about the snake, because at this moment, he suddenly remembered his life after betraying Rome and the heavy price he paid to sneak into the present world. Thick sadness engulfed him, making his eyes involuntarily shed 2 lines of blood tears. What's going on? He looked at the blood tears on his hand in astonishment and struggled to restrain the deep sadness and pain in his heart. It's just a humidifier, don't worry about it. In the entanglement of the sad python, Huaishur, who was in tears, opened his mouth and finally freed his left hand to pull open the waterproof jacket, revealing the cola bottle. With tape wrapped around the bulletproof vest, there was a humidifier that constantly spewed out gray mist. At this moment, Huaishur was unprecedentedly grateful to Yu Dongri, who complained that the weather was too dry and insisted on buying this portable humidifier. Now, all the ash made by Huaishur these days and 400 milliliters of purified water had been poured into the bottle. The two mixed together and became a brand new Coca-Cola. From the beginning until now, it had been quietly turned on, but the rain was too dense, causing the effect to take a long time to come. And after Huai Shi delayed for so long, the long-accumulated effect finally erupted completely. Now a snake, and you, two different kinds of sadness. It was double the happiness. In the midst of the intense pain in his forehead, Huai Shi clenched his fist while crying. He summoned the axe, adjusted the angle, and hit his forehead with the back of the axe. Bang! He was dizzy. What was more intense than this was the indescribable anger and madness that burned from the depths of his soul. It was as if his entire body had become a copper cauldron that was suffering. The sharp impact was transmitted unreservedly through the fish tank to the red glove's consciousness. It was as if a broken bell was hit by a hammer. In the buzzing vibration, dark blood seeped out of his ears and nose again. Immediately after, the goldfish that had burrowed into his brain began to twitch crazily. It kept trying to ram its body in an attempt to escape. Since you're already here, why are you in such a hurry to leave? Huai Shi gritted his teeth and raised the axe to his forehead again. He spat out a mouthful of blood. The goldfish twitched crazily and soon stopped moving. Once again experiencing the indescribable disgust, Huai Shi opened his mouth and spat out the purple-black goldfish. Then, he raised the axe in his hand and chopped. The red glove's body shook violently, as if he had been electrocuted. Another crack appeared on the fish tank. It was not over yet. Huai Shi turned his head and looked at the writhing python on the ground. He aimed at its head, slowly raised it, and chopped it down. Bang! The sound of a balloon exploding came from the red glove's hand. There were no more goldfish in his fish tank. It was full of cracks. After the last bit of effect brought by the incense dissipated, the pain of the soul on the verge of shattering exploded in his consciousness. He roared in pain, bent down, picked up the pistol he dropped on the ground, and pulled the trigger repeatedly at Huai Shi until the entire magazine was empty. But through the heavy rain, under the torment of pain, it was difficult for him to aim. Instead, he hit the sports car behind Huai Shi that plunged into the container. In a loud noise that was enough to send Yu Dongri to the ICU again with a cerebral hemorrhage, the luxurious dashboard completely shattered into a pile of garbage. Rainwater poured into the car through the broken front window, and electric sparks kept bursting out from the short circuit. For a moment, he didn't know what was triggered, but the radio made a mess of noises, and it actually started playing a CD by itself. The car stereo that cost a lot of money was completely out of tune. The treble and bass were mixed together, and even the sound of the electric guitar became blurred. We were on both sides of the stairs to heaven, talking about the past and the past, through the layers of rain. The singer's voice was like a ghost wandering between the dust and the tombstone. I thought you had died alone a long, long time ago. In the intense dizziness, the red glove staggered back, leaned against the container, and tried to gasp for breath. He had no strength to escape. Sure enough, in the end, he still fell into the hands of the Astronomy Association. You won. He threw away the pistol and looked coldly at Huai Shi. Whether it's the lunar prison or the trench cage, you can lock me up anywhere, but don't think you can get anything out of me. In the silence, only the sound of rain could be heard. Huai Shi didn't seem to hear it. He just looked back at the broken horn in the sports car in a daze. David Bowie. He couldn't help but want to praise old Lou's taste. Although he looked like a country bumpkin who only knew how to listen to music and play rural disco. As long as you love David Bowie, we are friends. Unfortunately, his friend was now lying in the intensive care unit. So, let's not talk about those boring things, okay? In the spasms and convulsions of pain, he turned his head and sighed tiredly. I didn't come here to take you somewhere. He said, I just want to kill you or be killed by you. Either you die or I die. It was that simple. In the silent gaze, the red glove's distorted face gradually calmed down. Only coldness and indescribable ferocity remained on his broken face. Is it another lunatic? Very good. He gritted his teeth and took off his torn coat, revealing his bandaged upper body. Just under the bandages, the muscles riddled with holes slowly bulged. He beckoned to Huai Shi. Come. At that moment, in the heavy rain, the axe blade slashed down. In a trance, Huaisher only felt that the axe blade seemed to have cut into something hard. Then he couldn't help but subconsciously let go and took a step back. At that moment, he only saw a ray of iron light rise up from the angle of the handle. It flashed past his eyes and cut his hair floating in the wind. Just a hair's breadth away, and his only remaining left hand and eye would be completely destroyed under this blow. It was only now that Huaisher saw the dagger in the red glove's hand. The dagger that was originally hidden close to the inside of his arm was thrown out with a simple movement and landed in his palm. It nimbly turned a circle and appeared in his other hand. It was like magic. He attacked step by step. The red glove's muscles were bleeding again. It was obvious that the effect of the silver blood potion had been completely destroyed, but there was still no sign of stopping. The priority of the attack was not the vital parts exposed by Huaisher's bulletproof vest, but his left hand. At this moment, apart from the unerasable killing intent in the red glove's heart, there was only a strong sense of fear. No matter what, he absolutely cannot be hit by Huaisher's weapon. The thing that looked like an axe not only had the destructive power of material objects, it also had the power to target origin substances. It could actually produce a similar effect to a soul attack. It was a terrifying attack that targeted both the soul and the flesh at the same time. If it didn't look like a rapier, he would have suspected that Huaisher's weapon was the famous border relic, the Ash Return Nail. The current state of the sacred mark made it impossible for him to use the melt skill. If he were to be hit a few more times, his soul would definitely collapse completely. However, the more he attacked, the more he couldn't help but doubt the skills he had honed for so many years. Although Huaisher was incomparably difficult to deal with, every time the red glove was sure to kill him, he would clumsily dodge. There were even a few times when he was almost hit by the axe again. This skill, he was clearly a rookie. Was it because his intuition was as sharp as a wild beast's, or was it simply good luck? Once again, the piercing attack aimed at Huaisher's left eye failed. Why was it dodged again? If Huaisher knew what he was thinking, he would definitely reply. Probably because he died too many times, right? Chapter 33. Even if it was a sure hit first sight kill, after dying so many times, even an idiot would instinctively learn to dodge, right? The current Huaisher, apart from luck, could only rely on his rich experience in death to deal with him. If it were to be ranked in the Book of Destiny, the Red Glove's proficiency in dagger combat would undoubtedly be at least level 8. For a weakling like him, this level was a terrifying difference that could kill him in one hit. If he wanted to win, he let go of his left hand in front of the red glove. The heavy weapon made of origin substance instantly dissipated and returned to Huaisher's soul. He had abruptly given up on his most advantageous weapon. In the next instant, when he awkwardly twisted his body to dodge the red glove's dagger, his feet suddenly planted firmly on the ground. He bent over like a horse, and then, the first move of the first set of military boxing. Lunging forward punch. Bang! His fist smashed into the red glove's chest. Through the bandages, a layer of scarlet appeared on the ruptured wound. After abandoning the heavy axe, his movements were more than twice as fast. However, his strength was too weak. Compared to the boxing king's heavy cannon, who could KO his opponent in one hit in the arena, it was completely in the category of being neither painful nor itchy. But the moment he was hit, the red glove's movements suddenly froze. His eyes widened in disbelief. His flushed face was almost dripping blood. In an instant, tears streamed down his face in the torrential rain, and he coughed uncontrollably. Does the tear gas feel good? Huaisher grinned and clenched his left fist again. As his 5 fingers tightened, pitch-black gravel endlessly leaked out from the gaps between his 5 fingers. It atomized in the abundant water vapor and flowed downwards. Calamity ash. The essence of the confining hand was the transformation between origin substance and matter. In other words, Huaisher could transform his origin substance, which was originally formed from his soul, into matter. The range was limited to iron, and as a byproduct of Huaisher's ability, what carried the intense pain and sorrow in the calamity ash was this iron sand, which was so fine that it was almost impossible to distinguish it with the naked eye. Once it entered the blood in the wound, it would immediately explode and return to origin substance, forcibly instilling Huaishi's pain into his enemy. After combining it with military boxing, this move could be called Army Killing Fist. Tear gas, right? If he was a person full of positive energy, this move might have become the fat otaku's happy fist. Unfortunately, what did that have to do with him, a heartless negative energy generator? Therefore, he stepped forward and dodged the wildly swinging dagger. He clenched his left fist and aimed it at the red glove's face. One punch. This punch is for Lao Yang. Then another punch. This punch is for Old Liu. He did not care about the dagger that slashed past his face. He was entangled with the red glove, and like a beast that was about to kill, he threw his lousy military boxing skills at the red glove's disintegrating face without any rhyme or reason. Then he shared his pain with the red glove without holding back. In the end, he clenched his fists and poured out all his anger and pain. This punch is for myself. Bang! The red glove's dagger flew out of his hand and nailed itself into Huaishi's neck and shoulder. Under Huaishi's fist, his head was like a broken basketball, almost falling off from his neck. He gathered all his strength, raised his leg, and kicked away the youth who was riding on him. He staggered to his feet and covered his skull, which seemed to be about to explode from the pain. He roared hoarsely, "What the F***ck are you? Why are you asking so much? Are you also looking for male prostitutes?" In the torrential rain, Huaishi slowly climbed up from the ground and grinned at him. Then, a smile appeared on the blood-stained face. Huaishi, male, 17 years old, a righteous high school student probably. This was the self-introduction of their first meeting. Then, Huaishi opened his hand again, and a pale flame ignited in his palm. He used up the last of his source form and gripped the invisible weapon tightly. Dragging the heavy axe, he walked forward step by step. "Come, the intermission and self-introductions are about to end, friend. Let's." A sharp sound suddenly burst forth, and the invisible axe carved a deep mark in the ground. Fleeting sparks flew freely in the torrential rain. Anger was like fire, burning the invisible axe blade red, illuminating the youth's pale face and the sinister arc at the corner of his mouth. "Let's start again." Above the pitch-black sky, blazing lightning flashed. The ruthless light shuttled through the suffocating rain, and thunder came late. This was the end of the battle. Behind the red glove, the burning rock in the sports car had finally reached its climax. The elegy was hoarse, echoing in a rain that seemed to drown the entire world. The red glove slowly stood up, expressionless. Facing Huaishi, he clenched his fists. His cracked knuckles rubbed against each other, making cracking sounds. It was standard Roman hand-to-hand combat. This time, he didn't have any hesitation or fear, even if they had to die together. He only needed one strike. At that moment, the two people's roars sounded from the steaming water vapor. Separated by the thick curtain of rain, there was the sound of iron colliding with thunder. As she madly ran, Huaishi roared and used all her strength to throw the axe in her hand. The curtain of rain was torn apart, making a shrill sound. Before the axe blade dissipated, it cut into the red glove's shoulder. The sound of the clavicle being chopped was like the sound of firewood being burned in a fire. At that moment, the red glove didn't have time to dodge. He felt the youth hit his body with cold iron and penetrated his body. It was the dagger that was originally nailed to Huaishi's shoulder. The huge force pushed him back, step by step, until he was pushed against the scrap sports car. The dagger that penetrated the body was deeply wedged into the car like a nail. "Farewell, Red Glove." This was Huaishi's last whisper. In a trance and dizziness, the Red Glove seemed to hear Huaishi say something, but when he lowered his head, he couldn't hear anything clearly. The sound of the rain was too loud. Only the singing from the broken CD player lingered in his ears. It was the singer's hoarse murmur. "You're face to face with the man who showed the world. You're face to face with the man who betrayed the world." The moment he saw Huaishi light the match, he laughed self-deprecatingly and lowered his eyes tiredly. "Ah, It turns out that the high school students of Dongsha are also a group of monsters. In the endless torrential rain, the matchstick slowly fell from Huaishi's hand. It fell into the broken oil cylinder. Soon, as the song was interrupted, a loud roar burst forth. Crimson flames gushed out from the crimson sports car and rose into the sky, engulfing everything within reach. Everything was burned to ashes. Soon it was extinguished again. In the pungent smoke, only a charred red glove was left lying quietly in the wreckage. Other than that, there was no trace of it. It's finally over. Crow landed on his shoulder and sighed softly. It's beautiful like a miracle. Well done, Huaishi. Huaishi didn't speak. He just leaned tiredly against the container and sat in the rain. For some reason, he suddenly thought of himself 7 years ago, when he held a weapon for the first time. If it was the Huaishi at that time, he would have cried weakly when he saw the scene in front of him, right? But the Huaishi of the past had been killed by him with his own hands, along with that nightmare. This must be the so-called growth, right? Agaze Ariadol theme millionshire. He closed his eyes and softly sang the unsung ending of the song. Wemistavit along a long time ago. We will die one after another a long time ago, also a long time later. Not long after. The sound of brakes could be heard off in the distance. A row of large headlights illuminated Huaishi. With the sound of heavy footsteps, the entire scene was surrounded by a group of familiar sublimated suppressors. After all, this was the Special Affairs Department. Once they were mobilized, the entire Shanghai city was under surveillance. No origin substance fluctuations could escape their eyes. With so many people mobilized, they arrived at the scene in 10 minutes. Their speed really couldn't be considered slow. Unfortunately, this place ended faster than anyone expected. Soon, a middle-aged man in a raincoat walked out of the crowd. He looked a little old, and his hair was a little white. Under the heavy raincoat, the silhouette of a rapid response vest protruded, and traces of heavy firearms could be vaguely seen. He surveyed his surroundings before finally looking at Huaishi. "Where's the red glove?" he asked. "Where is it?" Huaishi raised his hand and pointed at the wreckage of the car. "It's dead." The middle-aged man stared in shock at the completely charred corpse and the remaining blackened glove. He couldn't believe it. "It's you. Actually, it's a bald hero passing by." Huaishi chuckled softly. "Just as I was about to be killed, he suddenly descended from the sky and saved me. After killing the red glove with one palm strike, he left. If you insist on asking for a name, why don't you call him Huai High Road's Hero Peppa?" Obviously, this nonsense had no credibility at all, because there were still surveillance cameras at the scene. The security guards at the docks weren't idiots. When they heard the explosion and gunshots, they immediately called the police. "It's actually a sublimator?" The middle-aged man glanced at the surveillance footage and looked at Huaishi with a complicated expression. Although it was true that Huaishi had killed a terrorist from Green Sun, there were too many suspicious points in the operation before this. If they just went back home and acted like nothing had happened, it would be too disrespectful to the Special Affairs Department. Then, he sighed. "Boy, before you cooperate with our investigation, do you have anything to say?" Huaishi lowered his head and thought seriously for a long time. He scratched his wet hair and said, "If I have to say something, it's that you can't use your phone to listen to rock, right?" He nodded. "Well, I'll have to save money to buy a CD player later." The middle-aged man had nothing to say about Huaishi's carelessness. He waved his hand, and one of his men came up and handcuffed Huaishi's left hand. Then, he was lifted up and walked to the armored car behind. Looking at the slowly opening door in front of him and the prison room inside, Huaishi finally couldn't help but sigh. Sure enough, this kind of thing shouldn't be impulsive, right? Great, I don't have to think about how to eat in the future. Maybe someone will take care of me for the rest of my life. So, next time before doing this kind of thing, I should buy a mask first, right? It was completely useless to rely on Peppa's mask. "So, Director Fu, were you taking the employee of the Astronomical Society?" At that moment, he heard a cold voice behind him. "If I remember correctly, although the Special Affairs Division also has the power to supervise the members of the Astronomical Society, the specific detention, punishment, and trial is the power of the central management of the country, right? Moreover, tonight, he just represented the Astronomical Society to eradicate a malignant tumor that Green Sun buried in the present. No matter how you think about it, there's no reason for him to accept this kind of treatment. Huaishir turned his head in surprise and saw the girl in the wheelchair. It was Ai Ching. Her expression was calm, and her hands were calmly folded on a blanket in front of her knees. Perhaps it was because of the cold night. Her fingers were white and transparent, and the blue blood vessels were clearly visible. Behind her, the dutiful female driver held a large umbrella, not letting a single drop of rain fall on her. The middle-aged man, who was called Director Fu for the first time, was stunned for a long time. He looked at Ai Ching and couldn't help but look back at Huaishir several times. A member of the Astronomical Society? Him? When? 5 days ago, when Huaishir volunteered to be bait, he signed the Astronomical Society's Civilian Voluntary Assistance Agreement for a period of 1 month. In other words, until now, he is still a temporary employee of the Astronomical Society. As she spoke, Ai Ching took out an agreement from her bag and showed it to Director Fu. So, his personal safety and actions are all the responsibility of the Astronomical Society. If you have any doubts about this battle, tomorrow or the day after, I will take him to the Special Affairs Division to give a detailed explanation. But now, can you please unlock his handcuffs? Director Fu looked down at the agreement in Ai Ching's hand expressionlessly, but he didn't take it. After a long time, he laughed softly. This is the first time I've heard the word "you" from your mouth. It's really flattering. He waved his hand, indicating for his subordinates to let go, and unlocked Huaishir's handcuffs. Before leaving, he patted Huaishir's shoulder. Remember not to be arrogant, little brat. I really hope I won't see you in the Special Affairs Division's prison in the future. After that, he got in the car and led the team away. In the silence, there was only a sluggish Huaishir and the girl under the umbrella. What did I sign that contract with you? Huaishir looked at the stack of agreements that Ai Ching threw into the water and asked blankly, "How come I didn't know? I signed that for you. It was just printed 10 minutes ago, so it's still warm. The ink hasn't even dried yet. It looks like that guy saw through it too, right? You're giving me face. By the way, didn't you go to Jinling? I lied to you." Ai Ching calmly held a small floor heater and said, "If I said that I felt like you were hiding something from me, so I put a tracking device in your pocket and watched it from the beginning to the end, would you be angry?" Huaishir was stunned for a long time. He nodded and said, "A little? Oh, then be angry. I don't need you." Ai Ching nodded indifferently. She took something from her pocket and threw it into Huaishir's arms. He caught it in a hurry and found that it seemed to be a magnetic card, but the material seemed to be some kind of alloy. It was heavy in his hand. There was a letterpress print of the earth on the front and thorns and laurel leaves on both sides. There was also a buckle on the back that allowed people to hang it on their chest. "What is this?" "It's your life-saving charm," she said coldly. "From today onwards, you're the confidential secretary of the prosecutor of Xinhai under the East Asian branch of the Astronomical Society. To be honest, I don't care what you are hiding, but if you don't want to be imprisoned for murder, be prepared to work hard for me." Huaishir was stunned. Have I been recruited?" "Sure enough, if you want to be an official, you have to commit murder and arson to be recruited. I just killed someone and set a fire, and now I'm a member of the Astronomical Society, and I'm a secretary." "Hey, a male secretary. How novel. It's not recruitment. It's serving a sentence." Ai Ching glanced at his smirk and cruelly dispelled the last bit of hope in his heart. "In short, you do the work, you write the report, you take the blame, and you die. Your job is that simple. I hope you can be prepared. Before your summer vacation is over, there's still a lot of work waiting for you to do." Thinking of Dongri, who is still in the intensive care unit, Huaishir suddenly felt a chill in his heart. He felt that he would not live for long. "What should I do? I'm waiting online. It's quite urgent." And, before leaving, Ai Ching turned around and took one last look at him. At that moment, in the gradually thinning rain, Huaishir saw the girl under the umbrella smile slightly. She said, "Long time no see, Huaishir." Chapter 34. Name. Why sure. Age. 17. Wait a minute. Is the Astronomy Society also recruiting male prostitutes? In the quiet office, the young man behind the desk scratched his chin and looked at the expressionless interrogator with a puzzled expression. I say, Uncle, these days you've asked and investigated. At least I've eradicated a scourge for the Astronomy Society, right? Why do you treat me like a traitor? Routine investigation, please cooperate. For the umpteenth time, the interrogator said this sentence, and then asked again, can you describe to us the battle between you and the Red Gloves? I can't remember. Fleischer rolled his eyes. Probably the bald-caped Pepperfinger who passed by killed him with a slap. Really, I saw him fighting the Red Gloves as soon as I came in. Oh, the bald-caped Pepperfinger. Why is it different from what you said last time? I can't remember. Then, can you explain how you, as a newly promoted Splendid, killed the Third Order Red Gloves? According to our previous investigation, you seem to have always been a student specializing in music, and you haven't even been in a fight. Fleischer rolled his eyes. I'm born with superhuman strength. Then the next question, 2 hours later, the interrogator calmly sorted out the thick stack of records in his hand and got up to say goodbye, as if it was a routine business. Then, thank you for your cooperation, and thank you for your contribution to this world. After a formal handshake, he turned and left. Fleischer stood at the door with a dumbfounded expression. Finally done? Is there something wrong with the Astronomy Society? Sending such a person here and asking questions over and over these days. A.I. Ching, who was reading, was not surprised. It's normal. There must be a detailed record of Green Sunday. They're all transcribers. Their duty is to record your words no matter what you say and then file them back. Is such a superficial record really useful? It's just a process. A.I. Ching said calmly. If no one wants to cause trouble during the process, it's probably not a problem. Fleischer looked over. Causing trouble? Normal operation. Sit down. A.I. Ching calmly sipped the coffee brought by the female attendant. Where there are people, there will be conflicts. The position of a supervisor is so important, and there have always been too many wolves and too little meat. No one will be convinced that a lame person like me, who is only a few months away from 20 years old, has taken a position. If I can free up a spot by doing something, I don't mind doing it. Fleischer sucked in a breath of cold air. Your Astronomy Society is really in deep trouble. I'll remind you one last time. A.I. Ching finally raised her head and glanced at the tag on Fleischer's chest. It's not you, it's us. Of course, I don't mean to give you a sense of collective honor. If something happens to me, you won't be able to get away with it. I get it. You mean we're in the same boat, right? Fleischer sighed. After so many days, he had almost gotten used to A.I. Ching's way of talking. But why couldn't he hear any positive words from her mouth? If he was now a negative energy generator, then A.I. Ching could be said to be a factory. Their output equivalents were not on the same level. How did this woman survive until now? Of course, it's through strength. A.I. Ching answered without looking up. Fleischer was stunned and immediately felt a chill in his heart. Did this woman even know how to read minds? I'm not a sublimator, so I don't know those inexplicable things. If I were you, I wouldn't have all the questions written on my face. Fleischer touched his face subconsciously. Is there something written on my face? Yes. A.I. Ching, who was reading the book, lifted her head to glance at him again. There was pity in her eyes. This is a vivid description of the nature of human beings. Is it a dove or a recorder? Fleischer asked curiously. A.I. Ching did not want to talk to him anymore. Under Fleischer's constant barrage of noise, she finally showed a trace of impatience. She closed the book, and from the bottom of her heart, she wondered if there was something wrong with her brain when she recruited this kind of person as her secretary. What are you trying to do? She raised her finger to pinch the bridge of her nose and narrowed her eyes. If you're going to have nothing better to do after writing your report, why don't you do a thorough investigation of the top 10 haunted houses in Xian High that have been recently ranked by those busybodies on the internet? That way, there won't be people who are as bored as you who have gone crazy from exploring haunted houses. Don't even bring that up. Huaisher slammed the table angrily when the topic was brought up. That ranking is bullsh asterisk T. The first place on the ranking is my house. Why do you think my house is a haunted house? Isn't it just a bit deserted and poor? If I had the money, would I not have fixed the door? In the past 2 days, I've already chased away 4 waves of crazy people who came to take pictures. AI Ching sighed helplessly. So, what are you trying to say? I just want to ask. Huaisher suddenly became shy. He rubbed his hands and forced out a fawning smile. Boss, can you give me my salary in advance? AI Ching took a deep breath and resisted the urge to throw her book at the man's face. Haven't I already given you more than 20,000 renminbi? That's all. Huaisher held back his tears and looked at the dead crow on the tree outside the window. In any case, it's a long story. Now that school is about to start, I still owe 4,000 renminbi. I can't even afford food, much less school fees. Boss, can you give me some salary in advance so that I can celebrate the new year? It's only the end of September now. There is still half a year until the new year. AI Ching looked at him expressionlessly. After a long time, she took out her mobile phone. How much do you want? Huaisher's eyes suddenly lit up and he leaned forward. Hey, give me 5,000 or 6,000 renminbi. I'll pay you back when I get my salary. Beep, for 1,000 renminbi in Alipay. AI Ching indifferently put away her mobile phone. This is your basic salary for this month. Take it well. Unless there are other temporary tasks, you have to rely on it to survive until the 15th of next month. A monthly salary of 4,000 renminbi. Huaisher was a little happy. In the past, he played piano in the bar for the orphanage. How could he have so much money? Oh, it just so happens that old Lou is going to be discharged tomorrow. I can treat him to a meal. When did your relationship become so good? Are you jealous? Huaisher began to get carried away. The friendship between men is so simple. Is it? AI Ching calmly took a sip of coffee and asked casually, So, have you thought about how to explain to him that you burned the car he bought with a loan of more than 1,000,000 RMB? Soon, after watching Huaisher leave the office with a sorrowful expression, AI Ching finally ushered in a rare peace. In the silence, she sighed and looked at the huge amount of funds on the bank page on the computer screen, a total of 3 million US. Forget it. Let's not tell him about the bounty on the red gloves for the time being. How did a good house become a haunted house? Huaisher stood at the door of his house with his hands on his hips. He looked at the surrounding lush and tall trees, the green moss on the walls, and the Boston ivy. Behind the rusty door, the courtyard was full of blooming wildflowers and green grass. The broken statue reflected the white light under the sun. No matter how I look at it, the scenery is beautiful and the sun is shining. After Huaisher spat at the people on the internet who made random lists, he selectively ignored how gloomy his house was at night and shook his head as he pushed open the squeaky door. I'm back. No one responded, only the sharp sound of the door slowly closing behind him. Did you see that? How considerate. Even the door is fully automatic. Are there other places? Are there? The people who said that such a good place was a haunted house must have a bad conscience. After Huaisher snorted, he stepped on the squeaky floor, pushed open the front door of the house, and returned to the dusty hall. Then he picked up the cup on the table and drank 2 mouthfuls of hot water before going back to his room to pack the things he needed for school. However, for a guy like him who basically relied on guessing in cultural classes, the 3rd year of high school was basically equivalent to giving up on the classes. Instead, he was preparing the materials and teaching materials for the professional performance exam next month. The Professional Performance Certificate of ABRSM could be used as a diploma in most countries in the world. With this in hand, as long as the exam results were not terrible to the point where it was unbearable to look at, it should not be a problem to get a letter from an art university. So, does this really mean anything to you now? Crow asked. Huaisher was puzzled. Crow asked again, Do you think a diploma for ascender is meaningful? Ascenders don't need to eat? Don't ascenders need to work? Huaisher rolled his eyes. Do you think money will fall from the sky just by sitting at home? Crow sighed. What I mean is for ascenders, most people don't have to worry about money. Although it's not to the point of being rich, it's definitely not a problem to have food and clothing. How do ascenders get their money? Fleischer glanced at her. Murder and arson? What's the difference between that and robbery? Can't they live peacefully and make a living? To be honest, although the Astronomy Society did give him a very generous salary, and even if he did nothing every month, he could still get a basic salary of 4,000 yuan. However, if he thought about it with his brain, he would know how dangerous it would be when he had to work. Just look at Yu Dongri, a male prostitute who gave up a good life and came to be his bodyguard. And then something happened. Not only was he forced to join the old lady's Sunset Glow Yanko group, but he was also stabbed in the back by a traitor. If Fleischer had any feelings about the world of ascenders these days, it was only one word: danger. A large number of border relics with unknown functions, unknown threats, and unknown uses were scattered in the modern realm. Everyone had different soul abilities and strange stigmata that had merged into the bodies of high-level ascenders. Every single one of them was enough to easily kill someone. Even Yu Dongri, a male prostitute who sold his face, could use his great beauty, self-proclaimed, to seduce people to the point that they forgot to breathe, causing them to suffocate to death. As for himself, he was just a weak, pitiful, and helpless negative energy generator. Just giving a half-crippled red glove, the finishing blow almost took his life several times. Risking his life? Forget it. He should find a way to become financially independent as soon as possible, then quit his job at the Astronomy Society and honestly work towards his dream of playing piano in Vienna. At worst, he could just be a music teacher. Although the life of ascenders may be dangerous for most people, there are also people who earn their own living. Don't think that all ascenders in the world are bandits, okay? Crow sighed helplessly and raised his phone with one claw. Look at this news first. What the hell? Fleischer leaned over and looked at the manuscript of tomorrow's news. Rome auction house breaks record. Dusk lineage 5th grade stigmata, Nidhogg with 43. 1, 2, 3, damn, why are there so many zeros? Chapter 35. 433,410,000 ounces, Crow said calmly. Crow said indifferently. This time, we will use the most commonly used currency between ascenders, origin-form crystals, to settle the bill. All of them are of the highest purity that can be extracted from the border. The Golden Palace, the largest sublimator group in Northern Europe, mortgaged a complete resource-based border under its name in order to get this much money from the gnome bankers. The final winner is an Abyss archaeological team under the technical department of the Astronomical Society. They won't have to worry about funds for deep exploration for at least 10 years. Maybe you don't know what this price means, so I'll put it this way. 1 ounces of source crystals is exactly the amount of source crystals a standard adult needs. And according to the Astronomical Society's reference exchange rate today, you can exchange it for more than 2 million e-summer dollars from any of their subordinate departments. And this exchange rate is like the money given by the game system when reclaiming equipment. The black market price will rise by at least 2/3. Unless there's no other way, no sublimator will exchange their source crystals for currency. This thing is the hard currency of hard currencies. Now you can calculate how long you have to be a temporary worker at the Astronomical Society to earn so much money. Seeing that Fleischer was so poor that he couldn't even imagine the number, Crow seemed to laugh and whispered in his ear, that archaeological team just got lucky in the depths of hell and found a fossil. Now, are you sure you still want to live a normal life? Fleischer was silent for a long time and looked at Crow with suspicion. Why do I feel like you're trying to trick me? This made Crow, who had prepared the crutch but couldn't sell it, very sad. Fleischer sighed. Your next sentence is, do you think I'll lie to you? Crow wanted to say something but stopped. Then I'll tell you. Fleischer sighed again. Yes, you will. You've suddenly started to study by yourself. You're making things difficult for me. Crow lit a cigarette without any shame and shook her head. I'm kind enough to introduce you to a lucrative job. Anyone with a bit of sense would know that it's not good to get rich overnight. In this world, the only thing that can be done just by clicking on a forward button is a repeater. Huaisher had made up his mind not to be fooled. No matter what you say, I won't risk my life for money. Crow rolled his eyes, completely unconcerned. Fragrant warning. JPG. Huaisher really wanted to know what kind of stupid things she was looking at when she was surfing the internet on her phone every day. After making up his mind again, he got up and walked to the kitchen. He had only eaten a little at noon, and it was only 3 o'clock now, but he was hungry again. However, when he opened the cabinet, he was stunned. Where are my noodles? I just bought last week. It's a whole row of noodles. Under Huaisher's fierce stare, Crow rolled his eyes and said, Big brother, are you blaming me for losing the noodles? Do I look like the root of all evil? Besides, even 100 pounds of noodles can't withstand the way you eat. You eat 5 meals a day, half a pot per meal. The mountain of rice and noodles will be emptied by you, okay? She paused for a moment and revealed a smile that made Huaisher's hair stand on end. And, are you hungry again? Congratulations, happy growth. Crow raised his wings and clapped his hands. After ordinary people become sublimators, they will enter a second stage of development. The soul affects the body. At this stage, the sublimator's body will welcome growth again. They will gradually reach the limits of ordinary people in all aspects, and may even exceed some in some aspects. And you, who are 17 years old, are already in puberty. When puberty meets puberty, double the happiness is waiting for you. Of course, there's also 4 times the hunger and 8 times the need. So, if you don't want to underdevelop or even have your muscles digest themselves, it's best not to go to the trouble of cooking noodles. For some reason, Huaisher felt more and more uneasy. Then what do I eat? Generally speaking, it's high calorie. The higher the calorie, the higher the calorie. It's best to prepare a set of Fat Otaku Happy Pancakes, Fat Otaku Happy Chicken, and Fat Otaku Happy Water. This is also the cheapest. The downside is that you have to go to the toilet more than 10 times a day. It's easy to die from the ridicule of your classmates. At the same time, after half a year, you will suffer from endocrine disorders, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, anorexia, and other diseases. Huaisher was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. Are all sublimators so miserable? Of course not, but other sublimators are rich. At this point, Crow sighed helplessly. It's a pity. If only there was a kind-hearted person like me who could help you make the supplement potion. She paused for a moment and blinked at Huaisher expectantly. But without money, I can't even afford the raw materials. You're waiting for me here, aren't you? Huaisher asked expressionlessly. If you want to swindle money, just say it. I took it from you and used it for you. How can that be called swindling? Crow laughed heartily and said unhurriedly, 1 a day, 1 a week, then in about a month's time, your puberty period will be over. Since we're so close, I won't even ask for a processing fee. The cost price is 2,600 East Summer dollars per vial. For a month. Well, 100,000 should be enough. Spending 100,000 on a happy growth meal? Huaisher pointed at his nose and asked, Do you think I'm crazy? But this is really a good price. After all, no one would think that a sublimator can't even afford 100,000. At this point, Crow glanced at Huaisher. Besides, don't you understand the difference between spending money and not spending money? If you don't build a good foundation during puberty, you'll be far behind in the future. If you can achieve the best results, purely in terms of physical fitness, you can even become a soldier king. By the way, the meals provided by the Astronomy Club start at 300,000, and the effects are another matter. Of course, they can also be provided for free, as long as you sign a contract with them. If you think there's a free lunch in this world. Even if he used his brain, he would know that it was impossible, right? So work hard, young man. 100,000 is fast. Won't you get it if you put in some effort? Crow took out a test tube from under his wings and waved it in front of him. He whispered in a demonic tone, I support you to experience it first and pay later. Dream on. Even if I, Huaisher, starved to death from here, jump, 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 gulp. Finally, there was the sound of him swallowing. Huaisher looked at the test tube in front of him. As Crow waved, a tempting smell slowly spread out from its open mouth. An indescribable hunger was awakened in his body. Every cell in his limbs and bones was screaming for thirst. His heartbeat accelerated, his saliva secreted, his pupils dilated, and his stomach contracted. The instinctive hunger kicked aside the determination he had just made and then drilled into the tube of light green medicine. It pulled Huaishi's head and screamed crazily in his ear, "Drink it! Drink it! Drink it!" 10 seconds later, Huaishi exhaled a long breath. He felt the mellow taste of wine spread from his mouth. His limbs felt as if they were soaked in a hot spring. He couldn't help but shed tears of regret. "It's so fragrant." "Finished eating?" Crow asked kindly. "Are you going to start urging me to pay?" Huaishi was suddenly alert. "No, I mean since you've finished eating." Crow turned into a silver-white pen and summoned the Book of Destiny in Huaishi's soul. "Then let's have a simple and happy digestive exercise first." Without waiting for Huaishi to speak, the matter branched out and pointed out. Huaishi's vision went black. Then he died again. At that moment, Huaishi saw torrential rain fall from the sky. It was boundless, as if drowning the entire world, but he was bathed in fire. Flames rose from the viscous gasoline, covering him inch by inch. In a huge explosion, he could feel his body being torn apart, but unexpectedly, he didn't feel any fear. Instead, he felt a sense of relief, as if he had finally been freed from his predicament. He couldn't help but smile. The experience of death had never been so calm. It was so calm that Huaishi felt fear. There wasn't even the slightest resentment or hatred. He just calmly accepted it all. He closed his eyes and waited for the end to come. Even when the death record ended, Huaishi didn't react. He still stayed in that almost numb calm. This time, death was so profound that he even forgot to breathe and didn't remember that he was alive. It wasn't until his face was about to turn blue that he reacted. He couldn't help but gasp violently. He choked and coughed until he was about to vomit the noodles he ate last night. He hurriedly covered his mouth, afraid that he would vomit. He had just drunk a tube of medicine worth a few thousand. If he vomited it now, wouldn't he have drunk it for nothing? Money calms me down. "Oh, it seems that you've gained an incredible understanding." Crow sighed. "This kind of relief death is really rare. It's good for you to experience it more. I didn't expect that the red gloves guy to be able to understand a higher level of essence when he died. You're really lucky. How do you feel now?" "I just feel very hungry." Huaishi raised his eyes and stared at her, expressionless. "I really want to eat roasted crow. Boiled ones are fine too." When he thought of that kind of peaceful death, he couldn't help but feel his hair stand on end. Although he could feel that such a quiet and peaceful death was very rare, the terror that this kind of death brought to him was much deeper and stronger than other deaths. He was so calm and collected that he could even be said to be indifferent. There was no trace of nostalgia or reluctance. Before he died, he didn't even hate himself. It was as if his life had no meaning. What's so precious about this kind of thing? He rubbed his forehead and tried to expel that calm and dead state from his consciousness. He didn't know what this sudden sage state was. Take a look for yourself. Crow directly flipped the Book of Destiny over and showed him the records on the title page. Other than the word stress period being removed, there were no changes. There was an additional emblem of a solar eclipse, which meant that he had successfully ascended. The columns for Divine Mark and Divine Mark were empty, and there were no changes to the skills below them. It was just that Death Premonition actually reached LVL1. Huaishi was stunned. A single death experience had allowed the skill, which was originally grayed out after dying so many times, to completely take shape. Half of the reason he could survive until now was because of this skill. In the end, he only died once, and it had already leveled up. After all, it's a rare type of death. It's probably related to one's life experience. Let's put this aside for now. I think there's still a lot of time left tonight. Crow paused for a moment and revealed that smile that made Huaishi feel uneasy. Then, do you want to experience the new function of the Book of Destiny after ascending? Goodbye. Chapter 36. The next day, in the hospital, Huaishi saw Yudongri. Although his face was still a little pale, he was able to move without hindrance. He could leave the hospital in just over a week. Although the physique of a sublimator was much better than that of an ordinary person, it was very abnormal for him to be so unreasonable. The gunshot wound on his back had not completely healed, but Yu Dongri, who had been shot twice and had one of his lungs blown up, was almost healed. What kind of medicine did you take? Huaishir could not believe it. Weren't you still in the intensive care unit a week ago? Huh? What intensive care unit? Yu Dongri looked at him in confusion. Didn't AI Qing tell you? As he spoke, he pulled his eyeball and showed Huaishir his right eye. At that moment, his pupil suddenly split into two. Polychoria. It was the strange appearance that Huaishir had seen in a hurry in the church that day. Since we are so familiar with each other, it doesn't matter if I tell you. My stigmata is called Halcyon, a relatively obscure stigmata in the Dongsha genealogy. Yu Dongri said, it only has a weak enhancement to the vision, but it can improve the physique and has no other functions. But when I fuse with it, it will make a record of my body, like a data backup. If I am seriously injured, as long as I don't die on the spot, I can slowly recover to my original state. Huaishir was stunned for a long time and could not help but sigh. So, the intensive care unit is also a lie, right? Yu Dongri was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes showed pity. Although I don't understand what AI Qing said to you, it seems that you've been miserably deceived by that woman. Not only that, but I also lost your car, my friend. Huaishir looked away. Fortunately, I was not physically disabled this time. Otherwise, with so many loans, the money to buy the silver blood potion alone would have made me bankrupt. With that, Yu Dongri casually asked, all right, where's my car? Didn't you ask someone to drive it here? Huaishir's scalp suddenly went numb, and her gaze wandered to other places. I don't have a driver's license, so I can't drive. Why don't I find someone to take care of your car and then drive it to you? Sure. Yu Dongri nodded and did not doubt him. Only Huaishir was secretly worried. If that red Maserati turned into a cherry QQ after maintenance, would Yu Dongri find a tree to hang himself? He was discharged from the hospital without a word. While calling for a taxi, Yu Dongri smoked a cigarette and suddenly said, oh right, about the red gloves, thank you. Huaishir was stunned for a moment, and then realized that he seemed to have already known. His heart suddenly sank to the bottom. Oh, sorry at that time, but Yu Dongri patted him on the shoulder and interrupted him, so don't worry about the car, I have insurance. Huaishir was stunned for a long time, and suddenly felt moved. However, he did not notice that Yu Dongri quietly turned his back to him and wiped his bitter tears while he was moved. He was distressed about the money. If it were not for his birthday, and several rich women sent him a bunch of gifts, he was afraid that this time he would really vomit blood. Forget it. Let's not talk about this. He waved his hand, stopped a taxi, and called Huaishir. Today is the day that I said I was going to be discharged. If you feel bad, you might as well treat me to a meal. Even though he said that he was going to beat Huaishir up, in reality, he still had a sense of propriety. He found a light restaurant and casually ordered 2 dishes. During the meal, Huaishir also gave Yu Dongri the gift that he had carefully prepared for him. Yu Dongri looked at the big box of Overlord Growth suit with mixed feelings. He wanted to say something, but he did not. As expected, he should have just let this grandson be beaten to death by the red gloves. After the meal, as the two chatted, Huaishir asked, since you're now out of the sea of suffering, what do you plan to do next? I haven't decided yet. My flight is next month, so I'll go out and have fun for a few days. Before this, I was so bored. During my sentence, I couldn't even leave Exine High, and I had to report my location to the inspector every day. Speaking of the past, Yu Dongri looked like he could not bear to look back. Now that you've taken the blame, you've jumped into a fire pit. That woman, AI Qing, is not a good boss. Even though she has plenty of protection, she will not cheat you of your money, and she will accurately pinpoint the limit of your ability. As long as you're not dead, she will use you as much as she can. In any case, be careful. Find a way out for yourself. Even though the Astronomy Society is a large organization, the benefits it provides are not enough to cover us cannon fodder. Huaishir laughed drily. Even though AI Qing is a bit hard to get along with, it shouldn't be that bad, right? Even though I don't know what happened between you and her in the past, the last person who thought that way was her original boss, the previous inspector of Exine High. Yu Dongri chuckled coldly. At the time, your position as the confidential secretary was still hers, but a few months later, she was promoted to the official position. According to rumors, the poor thing from before is still in Africa. I can only say that she is from the Een family. Once you're caught, it's over. Een family? Huaisher was startled. His mind was confused. He seemed to have some recollection of this name. Never mind, let's not talk about this anymore. Yu Dongri shook his head. He did not want to continue this topic. Didn't you say that you wanted to find the nearby Ascender Fair when we were having dinner? Go pay the bill, and then we'll leave. Then he picked up the cup of tea and finished it in one gulp. He stood up and walked to the door. He did not plan to say anything else about what he had just said. Out of Huaisher's expectation, in a small city like Exine High with only 7 or 8 Ascenders, there was a fair specifically for Ascenders. And it was not far away. It was within walking distance. This place is similar to a business outlet. Many things are out of stock, so you can only order from Jinling. If you're not in a hurry, it's better to buy it online. If you're in a hurry, the price will be crazy. At this point, Yu Dongri's expression became more and more resentful. It was obvious that he had been scammed. Comparisons are odious. We're both Ascenders, but the treatment is different. He has a B-level protection from the Astronomy Society, and he gets a monthly allowance. I can only serve my sentence as a prostitute. TSK. Is he that good? No, how should I put this? That guy's soul is very strange. He was determined to be a rare soul by the Astronomy Society, and he might be useful at any time. Therefore, he signed a contract. The Astronomy Society will guarantee his personal safety and peaceful life. If there's any danger, the Astronomy Society will prioritize evacuation and rescue. But when the Astronomy Society needs him, he has to be at their beck and call. It's like rearing a pig. He paused for a moment, and his expression became serious. Remember, after you go there, remember not to let that guy guess anything related to you. If you don't want your life to become a mess. Huaisher was vigilant. Is it that dangerous? No, it's not dangerous. To be precise, that guy is probably a comedy type. Yu Dongri covered his face. But sometimes, being a comedy type is the most dangerous. Also, since you've already become an Ascender, don't casually tell other people about your ability. Also, don't casually ask about other people's abilities. Just like my ability, if other people know about its flaws, it's very dangerous. After Yu Dongri cautiously warned him, he asked again, since you've joined the Astronomy Society, have you done your soul evaluation? Not yet. Huaisher shook his head. I'm going to Jinling next month. AI Qing said that she would take me to the branch and do it directly. Then just make do with it. Don't be stupid and say everything you know. Lu Dongli sighed. Back then, I was at a disadvantage because I was too honest. I'd rather be called a weakling than to be too strong. Developing in a wretched manner is the way to go, understand? Probably. Huaisher half understood. Yu Dongri nodded with satisfaction and pointed at the door in front of them. They were here. What was even more unexpected was that this Ascender Bazaar, located on the desolate streets of the old city, was actually a detective agency. Looking at a half-broken sign, it was obvious that no one came. After entering the room, there was a musty smell in the room. God knows how long it had been since it was cleaned. There was a person sitting at a table with his back to them, playing games with headphones on. Hey, okay. Yu Dongri kicked a chair. Business is here. Why are you still playing? Wait a minute, my teammates are all AFK. This round, it's up to me to turn the tables. You've already given away 8 lives? What's there to turn the tables? Yu Dongri kicked off the socket and pointed at Huaisher. I'll introduce you to a customer, my little brother. Have some conscience. The person playing the game turned around. It was a middle-aged man with an unshaven face, looking prematurely old. He looked at Huaisher for a long time in astonishment. You're already a prostitute at such a young age? Lu Dongli's expression changed abruptly, as if he was frightened. He slapped the back of his head and said, I told you not to make wild guesses when you have nothing better to do. What if you guess something wrong? Okay, what do you want? The man wasn't angry. He helplessly got up and waved at them. The things are at the back. Follow me. Just call this guy detective. Although he's terrible, try not to reveal your real name when communicating with unfamiliar ascenders. Find time to find a code name for yourself. Yu Dongri gave one last warning before sitting down on the sofa outside. I'll wait for you here. If you can't estimate the price, just call me. Seeing that he was considerate enough to stay outside, Huaishir heaved a sigh of relief and nodded. There was an empty room at the back of the room. It was filled with cupboards and a computer. It looked like a storage room from somewhere. There was also a large safe. This is the first time we've met. I didn't expect there to be a new ascender in Xian High. The detective extended his hand. How should I address you, little brother? Huaishir followed Lu's order and didn't give him his real name. When they shook hands, he showed a standard smile and introduced himself. Little Peppa from Huaihai Road. The detective's face twitched. This was the first time he had heard such a refreshing nickname. Okay, I'm here from yesterday's delivery service. I have everything you need. If you're looking for something more unusual, I can order it for you online. There's no need. I'm not here to buy anything. Huaishir waved his hand. He leaned forward and pulled open the zipper of his jacket. After making sure there was no one around, he lowered his voice and asked, Brother, do you want some powder? Chapter 37. What the hell is this? The detective was dumbfounded. He had been a middleman for so many years, but he had never seen such a strange scene. Ahem, I'm talking about this. Huaishir coughed twice, took out a glass bottle from his pocket, and placed it in front of the detective. The bottle was full of ash. This was the simplest way to make money that Crow had come up with for him. As a rare essence, ash was a necessary base for some alchemy. However, due to the limited range of applications and the fact that the material itself was not difficult to find in the deeper regions, it could not be sold for a high price. Wait a minute. When the detective reacted, he immediately took out his phone and made a call. Hello, Uncle. I remember you placed an order for sedimentation at the border a few days ago. There's a customer here who wants to sell it. Why don't you come over and take a look? Within a few minutes, the computer screen lit up. What was even more strange was that the light on the camera transformed into the shadow of an old man. As if impatient, the old man walked over and instructed the detective to pour out a few grains of ash from the bottle and throw them into a solution that Huaishir could not name. Soon, looking at the reaction of the solution, his expression calmed down a little, and he slowly nodded. Nowadays, it's rare to see such pure ash in the modern realm. Let's sell it at the premium price. I'll take it all. The old man revealed a rare, genial expression and glanced at Huaishir. If you have more ash in the future, contact me. I'll buy it at the market price. After that, he disappeared. The detective did not say anything else. He took Huaishir's bottle and weighed it. After removing the bottle's weight, it was about 300 grams. Usually, such a bottle of iron sand would weigh more than a kilogram, but the actual weight of the ash was much lighter than it looked. This was all that Huaishir had accumulated over the past few days. If he wanted to get more, he would not be able to do it. After all, he was not the kind of person who liked to look back on the past and feel sorry for himself. He could only condense the ash by constantly reading the death records. After calculating for a long time, the detective looked up and asked, according to the recent transaction price in the market, it's a total of 84,000 yuan. I'll be the middleman and take a 20% commission. I'll give you his business card later. Next time, I won't be involved. You can contact the buyer directly. How about it? Huaishir had no objections. After all, the middleman was supposed to make a profit from the price difference. Furthermore, he was able to obtain 80,000 yuan so easily. This was the first time he was looking forward to his identity as a sublimator. Before leaving, Huaishir followed Crow's instructions and spent some money to buy a more precise set of dry pots and other materials. The cheap set at home was good enough to fool the chemistry classroom, but it wouldn't be of much use when it came to actual use. Just the simplest set of tools here cost Huaishir more than 9,000. If it wasn't for Crow's repeated insistence that it was necessary, he would have made do with it. As for the remaining 70,000, he did not intend to give it all to Crow. The guy always gave him a 50% discount. Even if he only gave him 50,000 yuan, it was enough for him to take medicine for half a month. If he used the remaining 20,000 for living expenses, it would last him a long time. Huaishur intended to save 5,000 for his daily expenses. He would first spend some money to clean up the chalcedony hall. He would reinstall the glass and paint the outer walls. If he did it himself, he would save a lot of money. The remaining money would be used to buy a better set of strings for the cello, buy a few chairs, and tidy up the hall. He was afraid that there wouldn't be much left. After leaving with the tools in his hand, Huaishur was still immersed in happiness. He thought that the wild dogs on the roadside were cute. Yu Dongri looked at his silly expression, shook his head helplessly, and walked in front of him. But just as Huaishur was about to say goodbye and go home, he suddenly trembled. His footsteps stopped, and he suddenly turned around. On the desolate street, there were a few hurried pedestrians, a few cars driving by, and a stray cat that had climbed over the wall and slowly walked away. At that moment, he felt that his death premonition skill had activated on its own, followed by a needle-like chill that poked at the back of his neck. An intuition that didn't need to be spoken at all emerged in his mind. Someone wanted to kill him. But then, the death premonition quickly dissipated, as if it was an illusion. Only the residual chill lingered in his heart. What's wrong? Yu Dongri noticed his abnormality. Nothing. Huaishur smiled calmly. Let's stop here. I'm going home. Okay. Yu Dongri waved his hand. Remember to come out for dinner before you leave. Huaishur responded and turned to leave. The death premonition was directed at him, and it had nothing to do with others. Now that old Liu was finally discharged from the hospital, why should he drag him into his own pit? It was rare that Huaishur actually took responsibility. But which bastard wanted to kill him? Oh my God, I feel like I'm being targeted. In the hall of the Chalcedony Hall, Huaishur looked at the crow in front of him. Crow pooping a dream. Do you have any ideas? It's hopeless. Just wait for death. Goodbye. The crow calmly replied with 3 emojis, unhurriedly checking the things that Huaishur brought back, as if it was a common occurrence. What's the point of asking such a simple question? If someone wants to kill you, you should kill them. Isn't it the right thing to do? How do I kill them? Conjure an axe. Huaishur sighed. He knew his own strength. He didn't look like the crown prince when he wore the dragon robe. Even if he became ascendant, he could only deal the finishing blow. Even a crippled red glove could beat him up. If someone came out an alley one day and took out a bobo shot to kill him, he wouldn't be able to resist. That's why I said it last night. The crow raised its head and smiled happily. Do you want to try the new function of the Book of Destiny? Although he had a bad feeling, Huaishur still nodded helplessly. Thus, the Book of Destiny opened, and the crow turned into a pen and pointed downwards. Huaishur's vision instantly went black. When he opened his eyes, he smelled the pungent smell of blood. In the dark basement, there were corpses everywhere. A thin man with half his body rotting roared at him, stabbing forward with his left hand covered in carapace. Huaishur subconsciously took a step back. He didn't even have time to react before he felt the sharp pain of his body being pierced through. Then, the man raised his deformed and swollen right hand, pressed it against his head, and squeezed. Crack! He was dead. In the darkness, a large blood-red word, noob, slowly appeared. What the hell? What's going on? Huaishur jumped up from the chair in pain and glared at the crow. Apart from the word noob, mocking me, isn't it the same as before? The crow asked. Didn't you notice any changes? Huaishur was stunned for a moment. Then he remembered that in the death record, he seemed to have taken a step back. Yes, that's right. He was no longer passively experiencing it as a spirit. Instead, he was reacting to death for the first time. Is this the new function? Yes. Crow nodded. If you used to be a cloud player by watching the streamer's videos, now you have installed a certain software with a Valve icon and can try to play games by yourself. Well, if that's the case, it's not a bad thing to not be a freeloader. That's enough. Huaishur rolled his eyes. He didn't know where this guy learned so many dirty words. But it seems that it's best not to let you play a difficult game for the first time. The crow pondered for a moment. In the current record of the Book of Destiny, the most complete part is the red gloves part. It's better to find a beginner's tutorial for you first. But before that, raise your left hand. Yes, just like that. Point one finger up and put the other fingers away. Like this. Huaisher raised his left hand in a daze, not knowing what to do with it. What's the use of it? You'll know soon enough. The crow smiled mysteriously and skillfully took out her phone to take a picture. She waved her wings at him. Have a safe journey. Huaisher instantly collapsed on the chair and fell into a deep sleep. Then, she opened the Photoshop software and skillfully marked Huaisher's picture with a line of words. I want to be beaten up. New emoticon pack, then, the beating began. When Huaisher finally understood the meaning of this posture, he was already in an unfamiliar training ground, being beaten up by a burly man barehanded. That set of Roman martial arts, which he had once seen in the red gloves, was now in the hands of this unknown opponent. It was simply amazing, especially when he attacked. There was absolutely no mercy or hesitation. He was directly aiming to cripple him. As soon as the whistle sounded, a flying kick almost broke his neck. Then with a skillful flip in the air, he landed on the ground and grabbed with his bare hands. Crack! Huaisher's right hand broke. What are you waiting for? Number 7,944. On the side of the training ground, the cold man with his hands behind his back said sternly, Did everything you learned go into a dog's stomach? Pick up the dagger and kill him. Or it doesn't matter if you're killed by this death row criminal. The cold tone of his voice expressed his attitude without reservation. Either die as a cripple or kill this opponent with a sneer and earn his value. Huaisher took a deep breath. In a short pause, he bent down and reached out to pick up the dagger from the ground and held it tightly. Sometimes he couldn't help but thank himself that this scene was just a dream. This way, he didn't have to think too much. He could pick up a weapon and kill someone without caring about the law, morality, conscience, or other considerations. Perhaps this was the scariest part of it. When he was familiar with all this, how could he be willing to return to his former ordinary life? For some reason, he found it hard to resist. Come! As the instructor whistled sharply, Huaisher rushed forward. Then he died. In fact, Huaisher was as fierce as a tiger. After dealing 5 damage, he finally succeeded in cutting his opponent's neck. He won, but at this time his waist was basically broken and 3 of his limbs were broken. When he tried to ask the instructor for help, the instructor indifferently walked forward and twisted his neck. The last thing he heard was, "You betrayed the Empire's expectations of you." Chapter 38. What the F***CK Empire? Are you from the Shimada family? After Huaisher opened his eyes, he felt like vomiting. Shouldn't he have recovered his HP and gained 2 more skill points after defeating a strong enemy? He looked at the dust on the ceiling helplessly. Where am I? Who am I? Where am I going? Do you want to continue? Crow seemed to be snickering. He sighed as he recalled the murderous intent he once experienced. It was as if he could feel the gaze that was spying on him in the dark. How many generations of bad luck did he have? Continue. He gritted his teeth, closed his eyes, and sank into the darkness again. Crow shook his head in pity, took out his phone, and added another line under the emoji pack. 2 rounds is fine. So the beating continued. The beating continued until the afternoon of the second day. When Huaisher was finally able to pass without any injuries, he felt like he was about to cry. This red gloves guy really didn't have it easy. After rejecting Crow's suggestion to continue, he took a hot shower with the rest of the electricity bill paid by Old Lou, changed into a black suit that was only worn for formal performances, and prepared to go out. It's rare to see you dressed up so well. Crow teased. Where are you going to ask the little girl? The funeral parlor. Huaisher sighed. There was no little girl. Today was the day of Lao Yang's cremation. No matter what, he had to go. The couple had always been good to him, although the one who was good to him was his sister-in-law. But in this day and age, how many people were willing to give you a chance to be self-reliant when you were at the most difficult time? Even if this guy tricked him, he still helped him in the end. To some extent, it was all thanks to Lao Yang that he was able to keep his dignity and live until now. He didn't have to pick up trash and do illegal work. Besides, although Lao Yang was sometimes unreliable, Huaisher was not a high-end talent. After so many years, everyone had tricked each other, and they were almost used to it. Weren't all so-called friends like this? Now that old Yang was leaving, he had to send him off no matter what. Even though he hurried all the way, by the time he arrived at the funeral home, the farewell ceremony was almost over. Lao Yang had been a middleman all his life. He had a wide network of friends and relatives when he was alive. Now, there was a huge crowd of people who came to send him off. Huaisha followed the line in silence. When it was his turn, he didn't dare to look. He put down the flowers in his hand, avoided his sister-in-law's gaze, and ran to the back with his head down. Although Lao Yang died in the church in Laotang, the official cause of death was a car accident. After being restored by the funeral parlor, the unrecognizable face had regained some of its former charm. It looked as if it had fallen asleep and was carefree, which made people feel uncomfortable. This bastard had spent most of his life for money, and in the end, he finally sold himself for a good price. He got what he wanted and died without any regrets. According to the people who came to send him off, when he was counting his inheritance, this guy really left a large sum of money for his wife, which was enough for her subsequent treatment. After hearing a few words, Huaisha walked a little further away. He didn't want to listen to it anymore. After the farewell ceremony, the body was sent to the back for cremation. To Huaisha's surprise, although her eyes were a little red, his sister-in-law didn't cry from beginning to end. Instead, she organized Lao Yang's final farewell ceremony in an orderly manner, making him leave with dignity. That bastard! How did he marry such a good wife? Huaisha's mood became more and more complicated. Soon, the funeral was over. When the guests left, Huaisha received a message from his sister-in-law, asking him to go to the back. In the family room of the funeral parlor, the woman drove away all the irrelevant people, closed the door, and took out a thick envelope from her bag. What does this mean? Huaisha was stunned. He looked at the envelope on the table. If there was money inside, it would be at least 10 or 20,000. Take it. This is what Lao Yang owes you. She smiled as if ashamed. In the past, he did so many things for me. In the end, it should be sister-in-law who has wronged you. Xiaoshi, you're a good girl. You didn't say anything when you were cheated, but you can't always owe him money. Now that he's gone, I think that I should make sure he's clean. If you really want to make me feel better, then don't decline anymore. Huaisha was silent. He looked at the envelope on the table for a long time, then slowly shook his head. What's there to owe? He said softly. In the past, when I didn't know anything, I always thought that it was natural for others to treat me well, because I would repay them 100 or 1,000 times in the future. But after I became more sensible, I gradually understood that sometimes, when those people helped me, they didn't expect me to repay them in the future. Even if Lao Yang heard this, he would laugh at me, right? For me, when I was at my most difficult time, Lao Yang helped me. That's enough. Nothing else is important. There's nothing that you owe me, and I owe you. He slowly pushed back the envelope on the table and said seriously, so, even if there's a little bit of my share in this, please treat it as a small repayment from someone who has been helped by you. Sister-in-law was silent for a long time. She didn't say anything to refuse. She just lowered her head, wiped her nose, and forced a smile. If Lao Yang was still alive, he would be ashamed to hear what you said. No, that guy would be immensely proud of himself, right? He would put the money away neatly, stuff it in his wife's bag, and then happily tell him that he didn't want it. It's too late to regret it now. He would take his wife to eat something good tonight. How did this bastard get such a good wife? Huaisha sighed. At the funeral, Huaisha didn't go with them. It was sad enough to attend one farewell party. There was no need to be sad twice because of Lao Yang. Plus, he really didn't want to see his sister-in-law cry. After saying goodbye, he prepared to go home. Unlike when he came, he was in a hurry to rent a house. When he went home, he chose to take the public bus to save money. He had to change 2 lines to cross the entire city before he could reach his home on the other side of Exionhai. Apparently, it was convenient after the subway was opened, but the subway in Exionhai was said to have started construction when Huaisha was born. After so long, there was still no sign of it. Plus, Exionhai was a medium-sized city. There were only so many people coming and going in the city. Even though it was a bit congested during the rush hour, it was impossible for there to be no subway. After some time, people didn't have much hope. During the long wait, he opened the WeChat that he had closed for 100,000 years to see if anything was up. Thanks to the pressure of being poor for a long time, his interpersonal relationships were lacking. He only had 1 or 2 acquaintances, and almost all of them knew about his situation. Therefore, there were no random people who came to find him for the whole summer. Other than the class WeChat group, which had now become a group for mobile games, there was almost no news. Huaisher scrolled up and realized that other than the daily messages of parties and treats, there was only the notice of the music room's adjustment after school started and a bunch of stupid pictures. The sad thing was Huaisher realized that the picture of him standing in front of the brothel had been made into an emoji pack. Can you guys be more humane? Huaisher was furious. Then he found all the pictures of the people who had sent him the emoji pack, added a panda hairstyle, and posted them one by one. Just as the stupid netizens were fighting with each other, his movement suddenly stopped. He felt a malicious gaze on him from the last row of the bus. Perhaps it was because of the growth period that Crow mentioned, or because he had gotten used to the feeling of death. Huaisher was now more sensitive to other people's malice. Even though it was not at the level of mind-reading, after being stared at the whole way, it felt like there was a caterpillar crawling around his neck. It made him nervous. Through the window of the bus, he could see the man in the last row with a cap who looked like he was sleeping. He was the source of the malicious gaze. When he saw the man take out his phone to send a message, Huaisher jumped up and rushed off the bus when it reached the stop. As he expected, after the man was stunned for a moment, he chased after him without leaving a trace. In the busiest pedestrian street in the busy city center, he strolled leisurely like he was taking a stroll. He even stopped to buy a pack of cigarettes, but from beginning to end, he followed Huaisher closely, not letting him out of his sight. Looking at the strange expression on that person's face, his wretched gaze, and his bulging chest muscles, Huaisher suddenly trembled. Her chrysanthemum clenched, and an ominous thought flashed through her mind. Damn, is he a perverted gay? After strolling for 10 minutes, Huaisher could conclude that the bastard behind him was definitely following him. Otherwise, even if it was a coincidence, it wouldn't be so coincidental as to enter the same public restroom. Pretending that nothing happened, Huaisher began to speed up on the crowded pedestrian street. He passed through 2 shopping malls, turned a few streets, and walked into the old town square. The person behind him turned left and right, never letting him out of sight. But after turning a corner, he found that Huaisher had disappeared from the street. Just as he looked around in shock, he saw the boy behind a glass door took out 5 yuan from his pocket. After bargaining with the counter Annie for half a day, he shamelessly changed his hand. Then, he walked into the door behind the lobby. The stalker froze for a moment, looked up in shock, and then saw the shop sign. Spring Bathhouse. Chapter 39. The stalker had a lot of questions in his head. He took out his phone and sent a WeChat message. Then, he pretended to be strolling and walked in. He spent 15 yuan to change his ID and pushed open the door of the changing room. A gust of hot and humid steam hit him in the face. Between the rows of cabinets, naked men were walking back and forth to change, but Huaisher was not in the room. He only had time to see the rubber curtain that led to the bathing area move. Someone had already walked in. Suppressing his confusion and anxiety, he pretended to be calm and opened the cabinet. He took off his clothes and walked to the bathing area. When he lifted the rubber curtain, he saw the expressionless young man in the steam that hit him in the face. His clothes were intact. He froze in place. What the hell? Why are you following me? Huaisher asked directly. What did you say? The muscular man's face twitched. Soon he looked puzzled. He did not understand at all. He waved his hand impatiently and said, Can you move aside? Sorry, I can't. Huaisher sighed and took a step forward. Bang! The stalker's vision went black. Then he heard the heavy sound of a fist hitting his face. His feet slipped and he fell to the ground. Let me ask you. Huaisher squatted next to him, looked down at his face, and repeated the question, Why are you following me? F***CK. The burly man was furious. He raised his arm and wanted to slap Zhang Ziyan in the face. But as soon as he raised his arm, his vision went black again. Huaishir punched him with all his might. Bang! Under the stunned gazes of the people who were changing, Huaishir reached out and pulled his hair. He lifted his head and pulled him into the changing room. Then he violently smashed his head on the wardrobe. Once, twice, thrice. A huge dent appeared on the thin, iron wardrobe. The man struggled hard, but he could not break free from Huaishir's hand. For the last time, he asked, "Why are you following me? F***CKU. In the severe pain, the stalker cursed and kicked Huaishir with all his might. He didn't care that his hair was torn off. Taking advantage of the moment when Huaishir let go of his hand, he scrambled to get up from the ground. He didn't fight back. Instead, he ran straight toward the exit of the changing room. With a bang, the cheap wooden door made of plywood was smashed into pieces. The long spring holding the door handle whipped his body, leaving a bloody wound. He almost fell onto the counter. Just as the Annie at the counter screamed in shock, he grabbed the baskets on the counter and threw them at the young man who was chasing after him. Then, without even a towel, he rushed out of the bathhouse's door and ran with all his might. Huaishir chased after him madly. Offense and defense changed. Now, the stalker was running around the streets with his butt bare, not even wearing slippers. Huaishir was right behind him, hot on his heels. Ignoring the unusual feeling and pain of stepping on the ground with his bare feet, he faced the screams of passing women like a wild dog that had escaped its leash. He didn't know if it was because he sacrificed his dignity in exchange for power, or because he was liberated by dozens of mobile phone cameras, but the guy's speed increased again. Huaishir couldn't catch up for a while. Finally, he couldn't run anymore. Huaishir blocked him in the alley. Panting, he moved back and found that there was no way back behind him. "Why are you following me?" Huaishir stood at the entrance of the alley and looked at him calmly. "Are you going to be straightforward, or do you want me to find the answer myself?" "I don't know." The naked stalker leaned against the wall and tried to breathe. "I don't know what you're talking about. It seems to be the second choice." Huaishir was silent for a moment, then looked up at him. "To tell you the truth, I don't want to do this." At that moment, the crackling sound of knuckles rubbing against each other suddenly sounded in the alley. Then, the stalker saw a black shadow rapidly enlarging in front of his eyes. Under the trampling of that pair of old leather shoes, the stone bricks of the alley suddenly sank and squeezed out the stinky sewage below. And Huaishir was already in front of him. Bang! The stalker suddenly bent down and felt as if his lungs were about to be squeezed out of his mouth. His bare feet were almost detached from the ground, and his arms in front of him were also thrown to the sides under the violent impact. Without waiting for him to regain his footing, the descending fist had already turned into a palm, pushing his face back, and back, until, bang, his head hit the wall. He subconsciously wanted to bend down, but then he felt a chill in his crotch. In the whistling wind, something kicked between his legs. There was a strange cry. His eyeballs almost jumped out of his face. "Go to hell." In the severe pain, his face became ferocious. While dodging, he picked up the wine bottle on the ground, smashed it, and stabbed Huaishir's neck. But then he felt a pain in his wrist. His arm was twisted at a strange angle, and the wine bottle was stuck in his thigh. Blood gushed out like a fountain. Then, the sharp pain of his broken arm and cut thigh burst out. He screamed in horror, and then found a hand on his neck, lifted him up, and smashed him against the wall. Huaishir looked at the distorted face and roared angrily. "What? Why did you follow me?" The silence came suddenly. The man suddenly stopped struggling. Looking at Huaishir's furious face, he laughed as if he had seen a joke. His twitching face squeezed out a smile, but it was unknown whether it meant mockery or flattery. His lips trembled, and he opened and closed with difficulty, as if he was confessing. "I want to get some money." Huaishir was silent. He looked at the old suit on his body, whose sleeves were beginning to come off, and the pair of old leather shoes with unstitched soles. He tried hard to believe this sentence, but in the end, he couldn't help but lower his eyes. He slowly let go of his hand and let the man fall to the ground. He tried his best to gasp, cough, and spasm in pain. "Okay," Huaishir suddenly said, "I'll give you money." Just as the man looked up in shock, he reached out and pressed his hand on his mouth and nose. Then he poured the expensive ashes into his mouth. At that moment, as his fingers squeezed, the closed mouth let out a shrill cry. The man suddenly convulsed. Ignoring his injuries, he struggled on the ground. Indescribable fear and sorrow poured into his body, ravaging his soul. Muffled sounds kept coming from his throat, but Huaishur held them in a tight grip, unable to release them. That was until Huaishur heard the sudden sound of brakes coming from the alley behind her. As the van drove off, several men wearing masks jumped out of the van and blocked the entrance of the alley. Their palms were bulging, and they didn't say a word. They only looked at the teenager in the alley with malicious eyes. In the silence, Huaishur finally let go of the stalker in his hand. He slowly turned his head and looked at the group of unfriendly people. He finally understood why the guy took him to such a place. It's him. As the stalker lying on the ground spasmed and raised his hand to point at Huaishur, the person in the front reached out and pulled out a machete with a dark green string wrapped around it. Then he saw the trace of various knives. Huaishur was stunned. He raised his eyebrows in disbelief. "Doesn't anyone want to explain anything?" he asked doubtfully. "For example, as an employee of the auto repair shop, it's reasonable to carry knives with you?" A strange laughter came from behind him. "Someone spent money to buy your life." In the midst of coughing, the man lying on the ground struggled to prop himself up with one hand. His twisted face squeezed out a sneer. "Be sensible, don't struggle. It's too ugly." Huaishur was silent. He raised his foot and stomped on the man's head. Bang! The man fell to the ground completely and stopped moving. Huaishur turned back and looked at the approaching people. He couldn't help but sigh. It seems that there's no way to be kind, right? No one responded to him. In the dead silence, Huaishur raised his hand and unbuttoned his jacket. Then he took off the suit that had been with him for years, folded it, and carefully found a clean place on the naked man's body on the ground. Finally, he stood up, bent over, and bowed. His attitude was sincere and humble. "I'm sorry," he said. "My friend has passed away. I'm very sad." In a moment of shock, the few people were stunned. They couldn't help but want to laugh. But then they saw the young man slowly raise his head and look at them with an expressionless face. "So, if there's anything wrong later, I'll apologize here." As he said that, he slowly raised his hands and got into a stance before his chest. He spat out the last bit of pity in his heart to his enemies. Roman dagger combat technique level 6. This place is still so quiet. The girl in the wheelchair sat in front of the desk and looked around. It seems to have grown a lot bigger. This was the city library. To be precise, this was the underground storage warehouse of the city library. Under the monotonous illumination of the fluorescent lights, layers upon layers of huge bookshelves extended to the end of the line of sight and disappeared into the darkness. Counting ahead, in the past 60 years, all the periodicals, newspapers, government announcements, and all the administrative regulations that appeared in Xian High City. In short, everything that could be printed on paper in a market was stored here. Even the electronic version was stored in the server storage room next door. It could be accessed at any time. Although this was one of the responsibilities of the city library, the fact that it could be done to such an extent was thanks to the man behind the desk. The current librarian of Xian High City, the ascender known as the Professor. Indeed, he could be called the Professor. This man had so many degrees that even he couldn't count them all. After all, his biggest hobby was to stay in this huge underground warehouse and read books. He would never leave this place. Chapter 40. In a normal person's mind, the people who were called professors were usually thin scholars with white hair, glasses, and a scholarly air. However, on a 2-meter-tall mountain of flesh, it was hard to tell. Now, this mountain of flesh was smiling at Ai Ching. The oil on his face was as bright as the sun. His hands did not stop moving. He skillfully arranged the utensils that were too delicate for his thick fingers. "Coffee or tea?" "Coffee," Ai Ching said. "No sugar." Soon, a cup of steaming hot coffee was placed on the plate in front of Ai Ching. The professor turned around on the ridiculously large swivel chair. He opened the fridge next to him and took out all kinds of exquisite cakes, puddings, chocolates, macarons, fruit from Ingzhou, Rome's thousand layers. It's time for dinner. Let's eat together. He smiled and tied a napkin for himself. He picked up the knife and fork. Recently, I've been on a diet. I won't be eating meat at night. Ai Ching looked at the table full of calories, and she seemed to be moved, which was rare. Soon, she shook her head regretfully. You'll die from high cholesterol sooner or later. If it's cerebral thrombosis, it's already happened several times. The professor raised his finger with a smile and tapped the scar on his forehead. Thank you for the Astronomy Society. The medical technology of the continuation unit will always allow me to continue this hobby. Even if you flatter me, it's useless. No matter what, I'm just a new employee. Ai Ching took a sip of the coffee and nodded with satisfaction. Even though she did not want to admit it, the professor's coffee was the best in Exine High. Even though she had quite a lot of rare coffee powder at home, her culinary skills were not as good as this guy's. You become an employee at a time like this? Then you must have had a hard time. The professor's brows creased slightly. Will the war at the Dragon Triangle affect Exine High? More or less. Ai Ching knocked on the table and sighed. This was a classic example of fire at the city gate affecting the fish in the moat. As a behemoth that was second to none in the world, the Astronomy Society had a lot of power. It was the embodiment of the dark side of the United Nations. 90 years ago, in order to deal with the threats outside the borders, the Pioneer Society proposed that the 5 permanent members of the United Nations, Isya, Rome, the Russian Federation, the American Community, and the First Dynasty of Egypt, form the International Astronomical Society. The current ruling body of the Sky Literature Association, which replaced the Utopia, was formed by the political leaders of various countries and major monopolies. Therefore, the First World War was called the war that ended all wars. Since then, there have been no more worldwide wars, but that didn't mean that wars had disappeared. They had just moved to places where ordinary people couldn't see them. In order to fight for the right to speak, there had been many proxy wars between countries over the years. Otherwise, how could Baghdad have been reduced to ruins? Dozens of borders were sunk by the 4 natural enemies who fought fiercely and fell into the depths of hell. The aftermath of the battle had yet to subside. Although countries and groups would maintain the existence of astronomy meetings under pressure from outside the borders, internal strife had always been inevitable. Just like the border war of the Dragon Triangle this time. Over the years, everyone had tacitly agreed that the country and its affiliated institutions had the dominant development rights of the border. But the reason why the border was called a border was not only because it was on the edge of the present world, but also because it was like a border zone with thin sovereignty. Especially under special circumstances, they could be moved over the years in order to fight for the Dragon Triangle, the Yamatai Empire's relic, the Gong family, who represented Tianjin, and the Wu family, who represented Tianjin, had been constantly fighting. It was not the first time that the two sides had fought each other, and the speed at which the sovereignty of the border changed hands was even faster than the speed at which the country changed its prime minister. In the end, after fighting for so long, the boundary wedge that fixed the border was broken. The boundary wedge could be F*King broken. Friend, you did it on purpose, right? In short, according to the calculations of the Astronomy Society, the Dragon Triangle had begun to drift. First, it drifted toward the Australian islands, then suddenly turned northwest. That's right, it drifted toward Isya. This time, Isya was overjoyed. The Border Development Group, Taiching Heavy Industry, had already begun to rub their hands impatiently, waiting for this piece of meat to fall into the pot. Then, Ingzhou began to be unhappy. But now, the Dragon Triangle had already drifted to the open sea. If you're not happy, who do you think you are? If the people are happy, then they're happy. Moreover, such a big thing is drifting over. You're hiding it and not letting anyone interfere. What, there's something dangerous inside? Isya's voice. Come, let me take a look. I don't know if it's developing normally, but the situation will definitely become more and more tense. What gave Ai Ching a headache was that if Xia really planned to deal with the Dragon Triangle, after a while, High City would become one of the most convenient ports to the sea. In other words, there would be more and more sublimators who wanted to make money, steal treasures, and make some extra money. And what AI Ching had to worry about was not only the crime of sublimators that would definitely increase, but also the mutual attraction between the borders. What if the Dragon Triangle's Yamatai border bumped into Xia's coast and collided with another border? Then it would be like a comet hitting Earth. Of course, she wasn't the only one who was worried, but she would definitely be on the list of scapegoats. It really wasn't a good time to become the official inspector of the Astronomy Society. Or rather, if she wanted to protect herself, she had to prepare for a transfer within half a year. The speed of the border drifting was not fast, but based on the current trend, and at most a year, there would be a huge explosion around Xian High. Have you found a place to go? The professor asked casually. With your background, you can't even do something like this, right? AI Ching glanced at him and didn't say anything. I'm just curious, purely curious. The professor laughed heartily. After a while, he had finished more than half of the dazzling desserts on the table, and the coffee that was so full of sugar that it almost turned into mush was also poured into his stomach. He was half full from dinner. He wiped his mouth, took out a thick file from under the table, and placed it in front of AI Ching. This is the investigation you asked for, all the current records and information about the Savior Society, the professor said. The professor said, according to your request, I only did the basic integration and deleted some useless, superfluous parts. But I didn't add any subjective arguments, so I believe this file won't be a problem for you. AI Ching was quite confident in her reading ability. If she wanted to make a guess, she didn't need someone to guess for her and add some subjective opinions. The most important reason why she was able to become the inspector was not only because of her almost perfect exam results, but also because of her intuition, which was considered a rare talent, even in the Astronomy Society. Yes, that's right, intuition. If she guessed the odd and even numbers without any evidence, she probably guessed half right. If it was a game of dice, she would be far worse than those professional mathematicians. However, it was only in the face of a complicated and chaotic situation that her intuition could reveal its value. In terms of probability, the probability of being correct was about 65%. The accuracy of more than 15% made her stand out from the complicated test, and she was evaluated as the best A-plus talent. This kind of talent was definitely the perfect match for the prophetic stigmata. Even if there was no soul enhancement, it was enough to make people look forward to it. The Astronomy Society didn't care about the 35% failure rate. In fact, they had enough ability to pay the price. If AI Ching hadn't refused the recruitment of the countermeasure room and chose to work elsewhere, the Astronomy Society would have started to train her. Because of this, she was sneered at by the trainees as a typical example of not knowing how to appreciate kindness. As an intelligence dealer, the professor knew the details of his collaborator very well. He knew all the records on the paper, but he was more curious about the things that weren't recorded on the paper. AI Ching was secretive about this and had never revealed a trace of it to others. In the silence, she focused on flipping through the thick pages. The professor didn't say anything to disturb her. He just changed the direction of the swivel chair and flipped through the obscure professional books on the table. If AI Ching had to say what she felt after reading, then only the water of the Savior Society was deeper than expected. Although no matter how you looked at it, it looked like a group of scammers, but there were too many suspicious points to count. Whether it was the origin of the strange border relic, or the ascendants who had secretly interacted with them, Wang Hai, who was confessed by the accomplice, was just a temporary leader. Before him, when the Savior Society didn't have this name, there were even traces of the existence of other leaders. It was true that they had been hiding in Laodang town to develop in the dark, but on the surface, there were many companies in the mainland that had extensive connections with other places. Not only in Shanghai, there were even traces that extended to other places. It could be said that there was no place that they couldn't reach. If it wasn't for the Red Gloves who made use of this church of scammers, who knew how long it would take to discover these damn things that grew among the lower class in rural villages and remote cities. From the looks of it, it was more like a subsidiary of a huge organization. But who was the hand that reached out? There were too many suspicious directions. India's Black Sky cult? The blissful paradise at the border? The American Union's Scientific Deity Society? Or Ingzhou's 108,000 ghosts and snakes? Unfortunately, the only two people who knew the details, Wang Hai and Qi, were already dead. Otherwise, AI Qing wouldn't have had to start all over again. She wasn't worried about the Red Gloves, who had already been killed by Huai Shi and the biggest terrorist organization at the border, Green Sun, behind him. The power at the border was still the border. If they wanted to do anything in the present world, they couldn't avoid the astronomy society that covered the entire world. What she was worried about was, what were the crazy people from the Savior Society planning to do? Had they done it? Or were they still doing it? What were they planning to do? Among them, who else was doing it with them? From the bottom of her heart, she didn't believe that a piece of trash like Wang Hai, who only knew how to scam money, could use charity to infiltrate the middle and upper class of Exine High. Just by looking at the file, she knew that guy's life was forever a scammer. Then, who was adding fuel to the fire behind the scenes? Not long after, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a phone call. When she finished the call, she was no longer in the mood to continue thinking. That's all for the initial report. She put away the file on the table. I'll transfer the money to you later, but the investigation of the Savior Society has to continue. If there are any new developments, please remember to inform me. Don't worry, I will. The professor drank his tea and looked at her expression. Is there another crime of corruption and sublimation? No, it's worse than that. AI Qing tapped on the armrest of the wheelchair expressionlessly. Thinking back to the description of Huai Shi on the phone, she couldn't help but sigh. There are many things worse than that. Chapter 41. Not long after dinner, Huai Shi once again returned to the interrogation room of the Special Affairs Department. He felt as warm as if he had returned home. Although his entire body was wrapped in bandages and the wounds on his face were smeared with purple ointment, it was not exactly glamorous. Then he once again saw the person in charge of the Special Affairs Department that he had met once before. He seemed to remember that his surname was Fu. Was this surname very common? Or was it just his imagination? Of all the surnames, this uncle had probably never enjoyed the treatment of a top official in his life. Noticing Huai Shi's pitiful gaze, Division Director Fu knew exactly what the kid was thinking. When he thought about how the originally joyous family dinner had been ruined by this piece of news, he was filled with anger. He opened his mouth to scold Huai Shi. Huai Shi, what the hell are you trying to do? Don't you need to start school tomorrow? You're already planning to skip school at such a young age. Do you want to go to jail when you grow up? Start school my ass. Why do you sound like the head of the teaching department? For some reason, he felt the pressure of starting school in a place like this. Huai Shi suddenly had mixed feelings. Someone wants to pay for my life. I'm also desperate. This is your second time in the palace. In less than half a month, you've been arrested and sent to the Special Affairs Department twice. You're really something. Director Fu suppressed his anger and sat across the table. He flipped open the report handed to him by his subordinate and pointed at the title. Another case of vicious assault? 7 people were seriously injured, and 5 of them are still lying in the ICU. Don't you think you're a little too full of yourself? Don't always think that my mind is filled with crimes, okay? Huai Shi sighed and pointed at the wounds on his shoulder and arm. The nearest wound was only a centimeter away from his artery. This was a defensive counterattack. Enough, don't talk to me about this. Director Fu picked up the remote control and pressed a button on the huge TV in the corner. The screen lit up, revealing the tragic situation in the alley. In the surveillance video, the crowd collided with the teenager. Then, it was like a wave crashing into a reef. Someone flew out and screamed in pain in the video. Then, it was a crushing defeat. From the first to the last, it was as tragic as rushing into a kindergarten with weapons. Everything was silent. There was no sound when the bones were broken, and when they fell to the ground, they could not scream. When the blood flowed out of their mouths and noses, there was no buzzing sound. It was as if he couldn't feel any pain. Iron hammers smashed on their bodies, but they did not take a single step back. Blades slashed on their backs, but they did not hesitate at all. They were so fierce that it was as if they did not care about anything. They knocked down everyone in sight, as if they were going to die together with their enemies. From beginning to end, it took less than 3 minutes. From beginning to end, the young man was expressionless. When no one moved in the alley, he turned around and took back his suit. He sat on the fire hydrant tiredly and waited for the sirens to sound in the distance. Blood flowed down from his trousers and formed a shallow puddle on the ground. It reflected a pair of calm eyes. It made one's blood run cold. The recording stopped abruptly. Then, Director Fu slammed the table angrily. "Why, sure, didn't you say that you don't know martial arts? I'm a natural-born god. I'm a self-taught genius." Why sure shrunk his neck. Do I have to be hacked to death on the spot for it to be considered normal? This was a vicious brawl. If an ascendant was involved, it would be an even bigger crime. Director Fu stared into Huaishi's eyes. "You know that the Special Affairs Division specializes in dealing with such incidents, right? Last year, I sent a kid about the same age as you to the border. Guess what happened to him?" Huaishi asked tentatively. "Becoming a Buddha? Isn't that great? Even the grass on the grave is as tall as you." Director Fu turned to leave. When he opened the door, he hesitated for a moment and looked back at him. "I've already seen the statements of those people. I know that you fought back in self-defense. But at that time, did you really have no other choice, Huaishi?" Huaishi was a loss. "You're an ascendant. The moment you ascend, you're no longer the same as an ordinary person. Most of the time, you often have more options and full power because you have power." Director Fu looked into his eyes. "But does the so-called power have to be shown to the weak for you to feel that it's valuable?" Huaishi didn't know what to say. Director Fu turned to leave, but he heard a voice behind him. Wait a minute." He slowly turned back with a cold expression. "Do you have anything else to say?" Huaishi hesitated for a long time, then raised his hand and asked weakly, I'm a little hungry. Do you provide food here?" Bang! The door was slammed shut. When AI Ching arrived, Director Fu had already smoked half a pack of cigarettes in the office. He still couldn't suppress the evil fire in his heart. He wanted to hit someone. He wanted to beat up a miner. To hell with the protection of miners. "Where's Huaishi?" AI Ching asked. Director Fu raised his hand and pointed in the direction of the interrogation room. "He's still eating our boxed lunch. It's already the 6th box. Hurry up and take the pig spirit back, okay?" It's normal for him to be in puberty. AI Ching was calm about this. On the way here, she had already learned about the cause and effect. Director Fu wouldn't put the attitude of condemning Huaishi on the side of the official inspector. In Dongxia, the relationship between the inspector and the Special Affairs Division was often very awkward. In the end, it all came from the standpoint of both sides. As everyone knew, even an ordinary ascendant without the stigmata implantation had abilities and physical strength that ordinary people couldn't reach. Therefore, in order to deal with the threat of the border to the greatest extent, and to prevent this force that could be used to protect the present and the border from being abused in war, all ascendants had the qualification to be exempted from military service. In other words, other than the astronomy conference that passed the resolution of the 5 permanent leaders, no organization or force could forcibly recruit ascendants to fight at any time. They also couldn't illegally detain or inhumane experiments on ascendants. This law engraved in the 12 copper tables protected the personal safety and freedom of ascendants to a certain extent. But at the same time, in order to prevent ascendants from using their power recklessly, all crimes against ascendants would be increased by 1 level, and all prisons would be unified at the border. The existence of the Special Affairs Division was a violent organization established to prevent ascendants from harming ordinary people. Most of the members were undoubtedly elite soldiers who had undergone elite training. They fought in groups and used long guns, short cannons, and tomahawk missiles to teach people how to behave. In the present world with the three great blockades, other than the few ascendants, the biggest source of violence was the military. Not to mention Little Boy Big Ivan, or the missile bombers. Just the frontal firepower of the artillery battalion and the cooperation of Bhutan was enough to make those monsters suffer. Nothing could fight against the military head-on. Whoever fought back would die, even if it was an ascendant. And the person responsible for verifying the crime of ascendants and issuing the black letter was the responsibility of the inspector. The inspector usually wouldn't go against the Special Affairs Division. As long as they could maintain the balance between ordinary people and ascendants, that was enough. More often than not, when the Special Affairs Division wanted to do something, they just needed to call the inspector and file a case. Other than the development of the border, what they should be worried about was the conflict between ascendants for the sake of profit. In the worst-case scenario, they didn't even care if their brains were spilled out. They just didn't want to splash on the ordinary people who live their lives. They would kill whoever dared to mess around. The present world was only so big. It couldn't even hold a few natural enemies, and it couldn't hold so many people. Thankfully, Xian High was really King small. There were only 7 or 8 sublimators, and they were not a big deal at all. Everyone was living a very peaceful life. Some were male prostitutes, some were second-hand dealers, and there were even some who ran a detective agency and slacked off all day. It was quite a peaceful life. After dealing with the people who were secretly causing trouble, AI Ching and the Special Affairs Division didn't have any reason to go against each other. A vicious fight wasn't enough to make them turn on each other. Neither side would put their personal emotions into work for a small matter. After a simple exchange of information, they went straight to the point. Who attacked him? A bunch of trash that can't even be seen in public. Speaking of this, Director Fu was furious. He placed the files on the table one by one and counted them one by one. Illegal gang members, human traffickers, fugitives, and people without jobs. What the F*** are they? As he spoke, he couldn't help but light up a cigarette. Seeing that AI Ching was there, he pushed open the window, took 2 deep puffs, and extinguished the cigarette. He took out a phone from a bag and asked, "You've heard of the collection of 10,000 sins, right? That dark web app?" AI Ching saw the skeleton icon on the phone screen and couldn't help but frown. In fact, although this app was a software, its nature was more complicated. It was already in the category of being a virus. Even the Astronomy Society had set up a file to target it. Unfortunately, the existence of the free border, dark web, couldn't be eradicated. In short, it could be said to be the intermediary platform of the underworld. They provided all kinds of transactions that satisfied the dark side of humans, whether it was murder, kidnapping, human organ trading, slavery, or even the deeper level of stigmata, relics from the border, origin crystals, offerings. Everything was available. There was nothing that they did not want. And now, someone had posted a bounty on Huaishur. But who would be so bored as to compete with a salted fish? Chapter 42. Green Sun. Director Fu asked. Impossible. AI Ching shook her head. Even if Green Sun knew that Huaishur killed the Red Gloves, they wouldn't bother with a pawn. Those lunatics are always looking at the Astronomy Society. They're not that low. The Savior Society? That's even more impossible. AI Ching shook her head. He's just a victim. Even if they want revenge, they should target me. Huaishur's file is still confidential. At present, other than you and me, no one else knows that he's a sender. For a moment, it was difficult for the two to continue thinking. That guy really knows how to cause trouble. Director Fu sighed unhappily. Let's just lock him up for half a year. He's currently an official employee of the Astronomy Society. AI Ching stared straight at him. If you insist, then I'm afraid we can only meet in Jinling. Jinling, the upper-level organization of the Special Affairs Department, the eastern branch of the Dongxia Republic Social Security Bureau. AI Ching's meaning was undoubtedly clear. If Director Fu was stubborn, then they could only meet in the border court. Director Fu frowned. Are you really going to protect him? He's my subordinate. AI Ching replied. No, he's a 17-year-old high school student. Tomorrow is the third year of high school, and the year after that will be the college entrance examination. Director Fu raised his voice slightly. If you really don't want him to be locked up at the border one day, then you shouldn't let him get involved in things outside of school. AI Ching looked at him strangely. You're actually caring about the growth of a teenager. I just hate stupid kids who pick up weapons. Director Fu touched the scar on his neck, and his expression became more and more unhappy. The more troublesome it is, the more annoying it is. He won't become the kind of person you think he is. Director Fu didn't answer him. He just remained silent, and once again recalled the eyes of the teenager in the video. It was as if he was finally angered. The moment he clenched his fist, the disguise was like a fog blown away by the wind and snow. The unpleasant, superficial smile finally disappeared and was replaced by a solemn and gloomy expression that was as cold as iron. To destroy everything with such arrogance. It was as if death was nothing but a speck of dust. That gaze was like that of an executioner. It made Director Fu instinctively feel uneasy. No, it should be said that he was disgusted. She hated people who had that kind of look in their eyes. She hated children who had that kind of look in their eyes. Miss AI, you're trying to put a chain on a beast and let it learn the rules of a domestic dog, but Huaishir is different from that kind of thing. He frowned. He's just living in a wild dog's nest. Even if he looks like a husky, his nature is like a wolf. Once he has seen blood, he can no longer be restrained by chains. AI Chin calmly drank the cheap tea leaves in the office. She put down the teacup indifferently. If you're so scared, why don't you just kill him? Do you think I haven't thought about it? Director Fu asked. On the night of the Red Glove's death, when I saw him for the first time in the rain, I had the same impulse. I can't accept the existence of a potential lunatic in my jurisdiction. But what can I do? I'm 46 years old this year, and I already have a child. Do you want me to kill another child because he might commit a crime in the future? Miss AI, he's only 17 years old, and the Protection of Minors Act is on his side. He still has a chance to choose his own future. Choose a future that won't hurt most people. That's what you call a domestic dog, right? AI Ching asked coldly. Cover your ears and pretend you can't hear. Cover your eyes and pretend nothing happened. Endure the pain until it becomes a habit. Submit to the abuse, wag your tail, and wait for the reward. Do you think that kind of life is a happy one? Director Fu was angered. He has more choices. He doesn't. AI Ching said. His surname is Huai, just like my surname is not AI. Whether he struggles or not, he can't change what happened in the past. Just like you, and I can't decide a person's future. She said, this is destined. Director Fu asked coldly, what do you think he will think of you when he finds out the truth? Who cares? No matter what choice he makes, I won't be surprised. AI Ching looked into his eyes calmly and said word by word. But before that, I won't allow anyone to touch him. Then what are you doing? Director Fu was amused. Atonement? AI Ching was expressionless. I'm just hoping that someone will come and settle the score with me. In the silence, Director Fu didn't say anything else. He just pointed in the direction of the interrogation room and asked her to take his subordinate away. At the same time, Huaishir was eating to his heart's content in the interrogation room. After finishing the supper of an unknown employee, he wiped his mouth and shouted, another bowl! In the silence, the few Special Affairs Division officers sitting there didn't say anything. They just looked at him with their arms crossed, a trace of pity in their eyes, until Huaishir turned around and saw AI Ching behind him. Don't always let others think that I didn't pay you a salary, okay? Sorry. Sorry for what? Because of how much you eat? AI Ching shook her head. The Astronomy Society has a drug specifically for the development of ascendants. Do you need me to buy it for you? Huaishir didn't know how to explain the crow incident. He could only scratch his head. I've already bought it. You dongri again? AI Ching raised her eyebrows, seemingly unhappy. It's better not to go to the detective's place. That guy isn't easy to deal with either. Okay. Huaishir, the Federation, readily accepted her advice. After the few officers left, AI Ching asked, what's going on today? Sorry, I caused trouble again. Don't always apologize for other people's mistakes. The girl rubbed her eyebrows unhappily inside. To be honest, I don't care what you turn that group of social trash into. As an employee of the Astronomy Society, when you encounter an attack, the standard response procedure even includes the option of killing. Do you understand? Don't underestimate the privileges of the Astronomy Society. Even if you pull out a gun and kill them all, there's no problem with the procedure. At most, you'll be recorded internally after going through the procedures. I'm just curious. What's your reason for doing this? Why sure didn't understand. Usually, you'd run away, right? She said, shamelessly begging for mercy or running away when you can't beat them. It's not your style to fight head-on. Huaishir was speechless. Am I a coward in your mind? What do you think? Okay, I think you're right. Huaishir sighed and scratched his head. He didn't know what to say. If you want to say something, you should be angry, right? Then, when you weren't careful, you went a little overboard and ended up like this. Does it have anything to do with Lao Yang's funeral? Huaishir was stunned for a long time before he smiled awkwardly. How is that possible? AI Qing didn't say anything. She just looked at him as if waiting for him to continue. After a long time, Huaishir finally admitted defeat. Okay, probably a little. He looked down at the wounds and bandages on his body and sighed helplessly. I'm scared, but no matter how beautiful my words are, when a group of people surrounded me in an alley with knives in their hands and said that they wanted to kill me, I couldn't help but feel scared. I always thought that I was so stubborn that I wasn't even afraid of death, but when I saw my friend lying in the incinerator, I realized that not only was I scared, but I was scared to death. Huaishir sighed. I've been a happy idiot for so many years. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to be happy, and I wouldn't even be able to continue being an idiot. But what can I do? I can't even live my own life well. Even if I go shopping when I have nothing to do, there will be people who want to kill me. No matter how annoying I am, this is too much, right? Yes. AI Qing nodded as if she agreed, but he didn't know what she agreed with. Was it annoying or too much? Huaishir smiled bitterly. He reached out to hold the table and propped himself up. The bandages on his body were bleeding again. This time, the injury was really not light. He found another bad habit that he had developed after reading the records. It was convenient to die at will in the records, but in reality, he would have to pay a heavy price. 1 against 7 sounded awe-inspiring, but it was impossible not to be injured when 7 against 1. Do you want me to give you a hand? AI Qing suddenly asked, as if she was referring to something. Huaishir smiled and shook his head. No, I can do it myself. You have to live your own life, right? He finally propped his body up and leaned on himself. He put on the coat that was hanging in the corner. The old suit was still spotless and covered the bloodstains. He looked like he had returned to the past, gentle and harmless. Should I ask the driver to send you home? I'll call a taxi. Huaishir shook his phone and raised his eyebrows happily. I grabbed a taxi ticket on the way today. It will expire if I don't use it. Looking at him holding the wall and stumbling a little funny, AI Qing fell silent. If you don't have a yearning for something outside of daily life, there is no reason to become a sublimator. She suddenly asked, Huaishir, are you regretting it? No. Huaishir grinned. I just haven't gotten used to it yet. As he spoke, he patted his chest and gestured an okay gesture. This is a small problem. Give me some time. The young man smiled, nodded, and said goodbye. He opened the door and whispered as if talking to himself. Give me some time. AI Qing watched him go downstairs. She didn't try to comfort or persuade him again, although she decided that it would be stupid to face everything alone. At worst, she would continue to dig deeper. If necessary, she would save him. Who knows, maybe he could work for the Astronomy Society for a few more years. His self-esteem and AI Qing's career were satisfied at the same time. Double the satisfaction, double the happiness. It was the best of both worlds. In silence, she looked at the page of collection of 10,000 sins. The reward that quietly increased, and her eyes became gloomy. $200,000? Wasn't this too cheap for an official employee of the Astronomy Society? It was rare that she decided to fulfill her responsibility as a boss. She closed the page. Her finger swiped and clicked on the complicated symbol at the top composed purely of triangles and circles, the Metatron Cube. It was a sales platform set up by the three major neutral forces at the border: Tomorrow News, Stone Cauldron Society, and the Workshop Alliance. It corresponded to information, border technology, and weapons and tools respectively. Soon, the page kept jumping and entered the page of the Alchemy Workshop, the Cavendish Laboratory, which featured a combination of sophisticated technology and border technology. Recalling the bounty of Huaishur that had yet to be warmed up in her account, she felt a rare sense of joy. $3 million. Enough to buy something good, right? Chapter 43. At 7 o'clock in the morning, Huaishur was woken up by the alarm clock. After being used to sleeping until he woke up naturally, he didn't even react in his trance. It wasn't until he remembered that today was the first day of school that his mood suddenly became heavy. Returning to the cage, walking right into the trap, a series of adjectives came out from his mind. Compared to this heavy weight, the pain of being chased and slashed last night was nothing. I don't want to go to school. He weakly wailed a few times and got up from the bed. When he turned over, he felt the numbness and itchiness of his wounds healing and the dull pain of his muscles straining. Thanks to his own growth in Crow's medicine, the scars on his body that would have taken a normal person 2 to 3 weeks to recover had healed in just one night. Even the scars had begun to fade. Perhaps after a while, even the scars would not be visible. But why not heal for a few more days? This way, he would have an excuse to ask for leave. Otherwise, how embarrassing would it be to go to school covered in blood? Maybe the principal would have a stroke. With a heavy heart, Huaishur got out of bed and went downstairs. You're awake? In the dining room, Crow smiled like a good wife and mother. She even wore a white mask as an apron. Breakfast and lunch are ready for you. Huaishur looked at the test tubes on the table and couldn't help but want to roll his eyes. Whose food looks like this? Why is there another one today? It's different from the others. Huaishur picked up one of the slender test tubes and slightly shook the viscous dark green liquid in it. Now, his imminent death premonition was telling him with a slight chill that this was definitely not some oral liquid, but something that would take away half of a normal person's life if they drank it. As the saying goes, shit is rice, pee is a dish. Isn't this for you to eat? Can't you say something appetizing? Well, to put it simply, this is probably some border material and mineral toxins left over from the original extraction. Don't worry. It's already diluted to the point where normal people will only be paralyzed if they drink it. If you drink it, it might dissolve some of your muscles and cause some damage to your heart and brain. Do I drink this because I'm tired of living? As the saying goes, without destruction, there can be no construction. Yesterday, I found that after you went through that vicious, beating, cough, that training under the stimulation of your subconscious, you actually accelerated a lot. This proves that at this stage, some stress and destruction will speed up your absorption. After all, the essence of anaerobic exercise is actually tearing apart muscles and waiting for them to grow back. As he spoke, Crow pointed to the measuring tape on the table. If you don't believe me, you can measure your height yourself. A minute later, Huaishur looked at the scale on the ruler in astonishment. 8 meters? The last time he measured himself barefoot, he was still 77 meters tall. In other words, he had grown 3 centimeters in just 2 days. It's not just height. Weight, body fat, and blood have also changed. It's just that there's no testing equipment here, so you can't tell. After about 2 weeks, your height will probably be fixed. The next step is to strengthen the details of your bones, nerves, organs, and muscles until you reach the theoretical limit of ordinary people. Depending on the difference in your ability, some aspects may be strengthened again. The range of the hand of confinement is your hands. When the time comes, the fine operation and dexterity of your fingers will be greatly improved. After Crow finished speaking, he threw the Book of Destiny and the potion over with his wings. However, before that, you should think about how to earn back the cost of the potion materials next week. Huaishur's expression stiffened. The heavy loan made him lose his smile. Swiping the card felt good for a moment. He sighed and pushed the door open. Behind him, Crow waved at him. Be careful on the road. Remember to take your medicine and get along well with your classmates. Get along well with my mother. Are you my mother? Yeah, so straightforward. Crow was stunned for a moment and looked embarrassed. If you want, just call me mother. It's embarrassing to repeat the word. Huaisher almost tripped on the stairs. He turned around and glared at her, then stepped on his way to school. One good thing about being an art student was that there were basically no classes in the first half of the third year of high school. Everyone was grasping the last sprint before the year before. After all, the fate of an art student was determined not only by the college entrance examination, but also by the professional examination and the on-campus recruitment of various schools. Huaisher only needed to show his face in class. Then he could go to the piano room to practice. Occasionally, he would appear in the evening's self-study class. It was simply unrestrained. Other people might apply for a sprinting class outside, but for the stingy Huaisher, it was impossible for him to fork out tens of thousands of yuan in tuition fees for these 3 months. In order to save money, he would do anything. Moreover, now that he had passed the 8th level of ABRSM, he would go to Jinling to take the primary professional examination next month. There was no need to burn money. For so many years, he had been developing wretchedly. However, when it came to the cello, he had never been afraid of anything. Even now that he had become a sublimator, he had never changed his dream of finding a proper job with the cello. Dominate the world? Harem? Compared to these, he hoped that he could have a place in Vienna's Golden Hall in his lifetime. Thinking of this, he suddenly hesitated. He knocked on the piano case behind him. Should he cut off Crow's shopping list first and save some money to replace the cello? Although it didn't have to be made by a master of hundreds of thousands or millions, it would be good to say goodbye to the factory. Just as his thoughts were running wild, he heard 2 familiar voices in front of him. Oh, Dad, you could just drop me off here. If other students see this, they will laugh at us. Why would a father laugh at his daughter, sending her to school? The middle-aged man's helpless voice sounded. His tone was full of affection. Do you have enough pocket money? Dad has to work overtime these 2 days. Do you want me to give you some more? Mom already gave me some. Anyway, there is nothing to spend in school. What she gives is what she gives. What Dad gives is what Dad gives. Take it, take it. It sounded like a loving father and a filial daughter. Except for the 2 people who were talking, there was something wrong. Huaisher couldn't help but stop in his tracks. Subconsciously, he wanted to turn around and hide behind the telephone pole. Unfortunately, it was too late. When the girl turned around, she saw him and her eyes lit up. Yeah, Huaisher is here too. I have been calling you for the past few days, but you didn't answer. Huaisher froze and turned around stiffly. He saw the girl who was wearing the school uniform of Doomsday, which did not hide her beauty. And beside her, Director Fu of the Special Affairs Department was staring at him with his eyes wide open. Then he forced a smile. Oh my God, so you guys are family. No wonder. You are both surnamed Fu. Why didn't I think of this? Oh, long time no see, class monitor, and he smiled awkwardly and looked at Director Fu behind her. Uncle, Fu. The middle-aged man looked at Huaisher in silence. His expression was so calm that it was frightening. Uncle Fu did not speak. Uncle Fu does not want to talk to you. Uncle Fu is accumulating anger points. Uncle Fu wants to kill you. Fortunately, Uncle Fu finally calmed down and squeezed out a kind smile on his old face. Xiaoi, is this your classmate? Yes. Fu raised her hand and patted Huaisher's shoulder. Dad, this is the good friend that I've been telling you about. He taught me how to read music scores. He's really good at the cello, and he's also good at his studies. Really? Director Fu smiled. Then you should get along well. Although he was smiling, the look in his eyes reminded one of the express bus to the crematorium in the eastern suburbs. Meanwhile, Fu was still praising Huaisher to her own father. Huaisher wanted to cover her face and cry. I didn't. Do you know each other? Fu seemed to have realized something. She tilted her head and looked at them, her ponytail swaying. Huaisher glanced at Director Fu, who had an expression that said, "You're dead if you say it out loud." She hesitated for a long time before finally saying, I've met him a few times. A few days ago. Oh, I see. Fu-Yi did not suspect anything and believed him. Director Fu's expression improved a little when he saw how perceptive he was. He patted Huaishir on the shoulder and said, Good boy. You have to study hard, okay? He deliberately emphasized the words, study well. Huaishir felt like his shoulder blade was about to be broken by this old bastard. Seeing that the school gate was right in front of them, Director Fu stopped in his tracks and smiled at his daughter. I'll see you off here. Hurry up, I have to go now. Seeing her classmates waving at her from afar, Fu-Yi nodded and waved at her father before running towards her classmates. Only Director Fu, who was smiling as he watched his daughter leave, and Huaishir, whose shoulders were gripped tightly by him, were left behind. Huaishir wanted to cry, but had no tears. He looked back at the middle-aged man whose face was gradually turning cold. He could only squeeze out a weak smile and beg for mercy. Uncle Fu, be gentle, it hurts. Uncle Fu did not spit out blood. With a livid face, he lifted the hem of his jacket and showed him his gun holster. Thus, Huaishir shut up and waited for his punishment. After a long time, Uncle Fu finally caught his breath and asked, Are you close to my daughter? No, not at all. Huaishir shook his head like a rattle drum. We've only met a few times. How many times is that? 1 or 2 times. Director Fu did not fall for his trick. He had seen all kinds of bad guys over the years. Young people like Huaishir were unstable elements in society. At the age of 15 or 16, their hormones were like wild dogs. They might rape and rob one day, especially when Huaishir had a criminal record from yesterday. How could he be assured that his daughter would be in the same school as such a dangerous person? When he saw Huaishir's file, he wanted to transfer him to another school. Kid, tell me honestly, he put his hand on the handle of his gun and stared at Huaishir. What is your relationship with my daughter? What else could it be? It was a pure, leveling relationship. Your daughter only knows how to spend money on games. It was all because of me that she was able to get to the diamond level. What else could Huaishir say? He could not say that the two of them had always been on good terms. Last time, the two of them worked together for the school's art performance. One of them played the violin while the other sang an opera, right? Needless to say, the effect was quite good at that time. This only proved that Uncle Fu was not a good parent. He did not even come to watch his daughter's performance. Moreover, in order to rehearse, the two of them spent several nights alone in the piano room. If Huaishir wanted to, something would have happened long ago. However, if this daughter Khan knew, he would definitely shoot him on the street, right? At this thought, Huaishir could not help but want to praise him. Uncle, your daughter is so beautiful. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.